and welcome to another evening of Mapping Kalegen with me, Andy Law, mapper to the, well, me and you. Much like we do every week, we're going to be diving into our map of Kalegen, which I've yet to bring up onto my screen. I will do so in a moment. A city in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And we are going to be adding to the south side of the city, a rather soggy, boggy, horrible side of town, and finishing off that section this evening. Much like all of the previous streams, this is not just me mapping by myself. This is me mapping alongside everybody who happens to tune in on the stream on a particular eve. If you come at this later, don't worry, you can always add in comments over on our Discord channel. I'll pop up a link for that a little bit later, so you can all dive into that if you wish to do so. Or if you are watching live, you can add your suggestions as we progress. So if you've got any ideas for the area that we're mapping as we go, just drop them into the comments and we will bring them up. But beyond that, I shall quickly bring up my map screen, which I don't quite have prepped to go, and bring it on like so. Arrival map. So this is where we currently are as we map our way through Kalegen. Last week, we were finishing off the section down near the bottom, which I shall quickly drop into now. The section near the bottom of the map is, as discussed before, a rather boggy, horrible slumland. We've worked through some old work camps where the expansion of Kalegen, which happened about 50 years ago, housed all of its stonemasons and various architects and similar. That work camp, as they were required no longer, turned into a slum area down in the south. We have ourselves a large plaza, which is filled with the detritus of the city. And as we move past the midden ball field here, we go down into a rather boggy, horrible part in the south, which is the bit that we're going to be doing today. So as we go, the process is I will bring up any comments from anyone that happens to have turned up this week, and I will take them into account, map out the things that we discussed. If you've got a new idea, whether you understand Warhammer or whether you don't worry, just dive in with it. Today's mapping is going to be finishing off this bottom section, and very little more, I think, today, because I have several things that I want to put in place after this. There we go, this section here. All the techniques we're going to be using for mapping this are techniques that I used in one of the Rookery mapping tutorials. We have an Inside the Rookery Patreon where we run tutorials and various stuff, and we run ourselves a weekly show where we chat with guests across the gaming industry. As a small aside to that, I've just posted up that I'm going to be doing 4 more tutorials over the next 4 weeks, starting I think the week after the next one. And we're going to be going into lots of different techniques for how you can map forests, mountains, various other bits and bobs as well. So do check out those. I'll probably pop up a link for that too a little bit later. But beyond that, let's get ourselves going. As I mentioned, I'll bring up chats as we go, the chat as we go. As for example, Alexander R saying there, hello, sorry, I couldn't make it to the last stream. Not a problem at all. But I was enjoying a LARP in beautiful Devon. Lovely, Alexander. Looking forward to this stream. So am I. I'm looking forward to just diving in and getting this one. And Yalan pops in to say, hello, Andy, and hi, chat. You said 4 weeks starting on the 29th. Yes, I did, which is a couple of weeks away from now, I think. So thank you very much for confirming that as and when it starts. We're going to be starting at Inside the Rookery as I mentioned, show where we chat with people from across the games industry about stuff. Gaming stuff, and we take a deep dive into a different topic every single week. When that finishes for its 4th season, I can't believe we've done 4 seasons already. I'm going to go straight into masterclasses every single week until the 5th season begins, which means we're going to have 4 of them weekly in a row. And the first one is going to be about different ways that you can map forests. I'm going to show 7 completely different techniques for drawing your forests, and I'm going to reference maps that I've made in the past for various companies. So for example, I'll show how I did it back in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2. I'll show a mapping method that I used for Critical Role. I'll show another mapping method that I used in a Call of Cthulhu map. We'll do very different styles ranging from top down, pictorial, and so on. So that'll be 7 different ones. Really looking forward to doing that. But you're right, starting on the 29th. And Executor also pops in to say hello. Hello, Executor. Anyway, I'm not going to dwell too much on the comments right now because I want to dive in at the bottom. I'm also going to drop a small mention that Martin, who normally turns up to these every single week, has dropped a comment over in the Kalegen channel on Discord. In fact, I will quickly link to that. So if anybody else wants to view that, they can do so. That's the link. And that's also a link directly into our Discord if you happen to be in the chat and you want to pop down. Even if you're viewing this video later, so if you're not watching it live, you can still click through on all the comments that are placed there. So that's where he popped it. And he dropped that we were going to include at least 2 locations in this section of town. He wanted to remind me of them. So I'm going to mention that directly in the stream now so that we can remember this. So he said he'd like to jog our memory about 2 ideas that he mentioned in last week's stream that might be better suited to this boggy part of town. One was oyster farming, maybe a specific dwelling as well as submerged basements, previously a ground floor. This part of the town we're about to map has sunk completely into a mire. So what may used to have been the first floor, or if you're another way inclined, the second floor, depending upon how you count these things. In the UK, we have a ground floor, then the first floor. So it might be the second floor for some of you out there. They might be the new ground floors that sunk completely, or indeed the second or third floor might be the new ground floors that completely sinks into the marsh. This used to be a relatively dry, solid land before it was completely deforested. And then all of the drainage was effectively blocked by a canal which was passed through the area, and it's had a significant downside towards this part of the town. If you want to know exactly how that occurred, refer to the many other previous streams, and we can detail that through the course of that. There is quite a few hours of it out there. Anyway, continuing on with that, he also adds the Sinking Curiosity Shop, a collector of diverse scrolls and esoterica. The shop's lowest level is barely visible, its wares potentially lost, the lowest layer above ground now being claimed by molds and slimes. Also, have you considered the streets turning into apparently flooded canals for a mini Venice feel? Maybe locals pull themselves around on coracles. And I think that's not necessarily a bad idea. We could have ourselves a nice little detail about how the locals have got themselves some relatively makeshift style coracles or equivalent small boats making their way through the boggy mire that is down here in the south. Perhaps we want to, because that is a barrier from the outside population of the city itself, we could even have people who are attempting to avoid that location sinking themselves into this part of town. We've also had a few other comments, which I'm going to drop in here as well. You may note that there's some notes written down here. One is a mercy house. Another one is housing for the poor. That was a small reminder to myself as we had previous discussions about what we could put down here. And that is, loosely speaking, this was originally going to be a relatively rich part of town, and it has sunk. And part of that was a great public work, a mercy house, which was going to be erected for Shalians, the goddess of mercy, to provide succor and help to whomever may be local here. And unfortunately, that has sunk along with their great intentions, and it has never really been properly fixed. So we'll add that to this area as well. Much like all the parts of Kalegen we've mapped so far, we've got 2 types of building. Building number 1 is our purple buildings, as you can see here with our Temple of Sigmar. Number 2 is our brown buildings, which are all the general buildings in the district. The importance of the purple buildings is that we will be detailing them out significantly inside World Anvil, which is a large database of awesome that we're building in the background. If you don't know World Anvil, I strongly recommend you pop over. Indeed, let me drop a quick plug for that too, because World Anvil are doing a big online convention this weekend, World Building Con, which is going to be dragging people from across the games industry to talk about various subjects. I'm going to be there discussing, I forget what I'm discussing, something map-based probably. Oh, that's an embarrassing thing to admit, but I'll be talking about it anyway. World building, maps, yeah. But they have everyone ranging from the Tracy Hickmans of the world right down to myself, from all different types of backgrounds, be it authors, be it role-play game designers, be it designers of other sorts. They'll all be gathering online and doing a bunch of talks, question and answers. On top of that, though, there's also going to be an award ceremony for different World Anvil options that are sitting out there. If you want to go see other people's World Anvil accounts, I was one of the guest judges on that, and that was an extraordinarily fun experience for me. So that's this Saturday, Sunday. If you check on World Anvil, you'll see it all up. Just do World Anvil, and it'll probably pop up immediately with our World Building Con. So other than that, let's have a quick check if there's any comments before I dive in. And once I've checked through those comments, I'm just going to start mapping here. My plan this evening is to complete all the boggy section in the south. And if that takes 20 minutes, It won't. But if it took 20 minutes, I would stop then. If that takes a lot longer, then so be it. That's how long it will take. Let's have a quick look at the comments and see where we are. Alexander R jumps in and says, didn't we have an idea about a large snake-like creature living in the wet part? Yes, we did. In Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1, there was a creature called the Fenworm. Fendrake? Fen snake? Fen snake? Fen? I forget what it's called. I even wrote it up once for our second edition. Anyway, regardless, big gigantic snake, Fenworm. Can someone remind me who's any Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1 fans out there? It's completely fled my mind, even though I wrote it up for the second edition. And they're basically giant marsh snakes, and they're poisonous, and they are horrible. And having one of them working its way around down here is a good idea. Perhaps to add some more character as to why it's still alive or why it's not alive, we could build a little story into that, particularly because we're going to look for primarily building adventure hooks into all of these things. So if you've got any ideas for how that manifests, then do so. There's not an obvious location that we could mark for that unless we decide to mark it into an obvious location. Executor adds, could any of the suggested buildings be up in a row of buildings on stilts with rope ladders going between them? Yes, they could. And indeed, there was a suggestion in a previous stream that we link all of our buildings together, or at least a good chunk of the buildings together, whether they're leaning or they're half sunk, to give an almost walkway-like feeling, a little bit like, say, Necromunda, but a fantasy version of it. Mordheim, after the great explosion as the Hammer of Sigmar smites its way into the center of the town. And possibly we could do that as we move between it. And we could have our little Fenwormy thing, or whatever the heck it's called, running around down at the bottom. Or perhaps we could have snotlings, as somebody else suggested, that there might be some snotlings that have mushroomed their way up into the lower levels of some of the basements here. Certainly something to consider. But I think, yeah, that's going to be a good way of making this part of town look different to the other parts of town. We can link everything together. Yalab then offers, unrelated to Kalegen. Oh, let's find out. But Andy, have you ever put thoughts on how elves would perceive reality around them to text that's available somewhere like the old blog or something? I'm not quite sure what you mean there. If you're just asking how elves perceive reality, if I put thought into that, absolutely. One of my players is an elf player, and she has quite a different way of viewing the world to the rest of the PCs. One of the things that I find quite important when either creating for stuff officially, which obviously I've moved on from just now, or whether I'm doing it for my own games, is trying to make sure that the other species are not just humans with a detail change. Like, for example, we're elves, we're haughty humans with pointy ears, or they're dwarves, we're grumpy humans that live in mountains. I try to make my different species really feel alien and different. My halflings are very different to humans. My dwarves are very different too. Now, does that mean that they contradict Games Workshop's overall lore when I'm writing officially? Absolutely not. When I'm writing for my own game, they don't contradict, they embellish. We add extra details on top to make them a bit more whatever it is that I feel that that species requires to really ground them as something different and discrete from humanity. So have I put thought into it? Yes. And if I answered your question correctly, great. If I didn't, please re-ask it in a different way. Lial then moves on. I was looking at Lindsay's masterclass and later discussions, got curious about that. Yeah, and a good place. A lot of what Lindsay was discussing in her masterclass and Inside the Rookery was based upon a chunk of the material that we've used in our own games. Our halflings are just different. Our halflings have got at least one different sense. Their spittle is full of a variety of enzymes that do different things. Their bodies are constructed internally quite different. They're not all fat, much like ogres aren't all fat. Although if you look at the Warhammer Ogre models or the Warhammer Halfling Ogres, the Halfling models, pardon me, they all look fat, but there's a reason for that that exists, at least in my game, if not the overall official material. Obscure then adds, I mean rope bridges, and I think that's totally fine. I agree. Rope bridges, perfect. And planks, Last of Us style, getting laid out and over, or whatever else they manage to get their hands on. I can imagine that this section of the city is somewhat makeshift in its construction. So it will be a collaboration between all the folks that live there and a conglomeration of different stuff just used in any way they possibly can, with wood that doesn't rot probably winning priority over everything else. Alexander then adds, but there could be small huts built on top of sunken buildings. Yes, there could. And I think that that's something that we could do to try and characterize this area a little bit differently as well. And that's to give the idea of definite layering going on. Stuff that has been added on top. Alan Stainer pops in and says, evening all. Evening, Alan. Delighted that you could make it. Marvelous. The 4E Beastry says it's a fen worm. Thank you very much. I couldn't recall. I was actually thinking of the 4E Beastry not that long ago because it came up in a conversation that we were having elsewhere, and one of the patrons that for Lawhammer has sent us a collector's edition of the bestiary, and for me it's really gratifying seeing that book because I remember when I first planned it, and I first planned it to be not just another bestiary. It was to be designed to be something that could be read, it could be utilized, it could do a variety of things. Now the execution that they did in the end wasn't what I originally planned because the stat blocks are completely different and how they presented certain sections work. But the underlying core of what it is still the same as what I originally planned when I pitched the idea to TS. Originally, I think TS may have written the whole thing now, but originally it was going to be TS, me, B, and Andy Lease that were going to be writing it, adding a variety of different perspectives, each of us writing in different characters. But in the end, I think TS may have done the whole thing himself, poor chap. That's what happens when somebody leaves, I suppose. But yeah, super good book. I think it is the Fenworm in first edition as well. Probably is. Sure it is. Yeah, then adds, oh, also, maybe I'm misremembering something. Probably not. The last week you mentioned that you may have some sort of extract from your master map of the Hours World area. I was going to give you a bit about that. Or have I hallucinated? I was going to give you a bit of that. I have you asked over on the Discord forum, Yalla, but there's a map of that area. I've got one and I will post it up. It's a relatively old one, but I looked at a part of some of my later maps and all the details are largely identical. So I'll pop that up for you. Worry not. I'll do that over in Discord. And Yellow Ben Dead, I knew you put some thought into how species are different. I was asking if those thoughts are available to access somewhere, as in a postal blog. They're not available online anywhere, largely because a significant chunk of the stuff that I put over on my Lawhammer blog ended up in the various games that I was writing about at the time. Indeed, for example, just to give a single example, the electric count of Averland stats were uplifted from my blog and just put into an official book. So I just kind of stopped because, if I'm not getting paid for it, I don't want to be doing other stuff, particularly if I'm not credited. That was one of the rare examples where it was so egregious that I contacted and said, you've just copied it. Can I get a credit or can you not? So they changed all the stats and that was cool. But I've not popped it up largely because I don't want to put something up and then have it appear in some book as if it's someone else's original idea, but I'm more than happy for it to unfold throughout the course of the stream, largely because that's the sort of stuff that if anyone wants to access it, they're going to have to dive in for hours and hours and hours worth of streamed content. But cut a long story short, all of my species are different, and yes, that will become a particular point and a plot point during the course of the Lawhammer streams. Yalp says, I mean, it is T.S. Lukert's work, although Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2 bestiary frame. It's solid work. Only thing I'm mad about is that it doesn't match the style of the other books. I can't say I read it close enough to know that for one way or the other, and I'm sure it doesn't, given that you said that. Right, so I'm going to dive in immediately. I'm going to do some lining, get some of this area into place. We're going to need our walls bounding this area in as well. And our Mercy House and our housing for the poor and our little curiosity shop, we'll add that too, and the various other things that we've discussed so far. If, as during the course of me mapping this, any parts of it don't look right to you or you think that perhaps it should change, feel free to drop it as a comment. I'll probably break this up into 3 sections in the mapping of it. So I'll start mapping section 1, and then I'll check in the comments. I'll map section 2, check in the comments, and then section 3, and we'll just slowly but surely expand out this entire location. We are going to be running up and into the edge of the barge building section, which is up here, which I will mark with a quick ring. So we've got to make sure that the transition between the relatively solid sections of the barge building and the horrible, the horrible sections down to the south make sense. And I think that we can probably do that with just the simple buttressing of the canals itself, which are all stone lined, and it can go stone lined and then the land can sink off from behind it. Originally, the land would have been equal and flat with the top of the canal edge. Now it's sunk down completely and collapsed into water. Now, that doesn't sound right to anyone. Do drop a comment and we can discuss it out perhaps in a slightly different way. But to start off, I'm going to get my brush, get the correct size of brush. I want about a size 6 for this one. Again, if you want to know the techniques that I'm using to do this, absolutely everything is discussed in one of the Rookery's tutorials. Why don't I have a line appearing? Control D. Let's try that again. There we go. That's why. Let's make that slightly smaller. And we have our line. Excellent. I need, I think I want a bit smaller actually, given the, that's better. Right. So I'm going to mark in the edge of the canal, which goes into the barge building areas, and they're going to require a bit of space. I'm going to imagine that there was originally barge building here, where we currently are, and around this section, right at the very edge, barges getting built in around this area, but a lot of that land has collapsed. So most of the barge building has now moved up into these areas up here, around that area. So perhaps originally there used to be more here, but the buildings have already begun to collapse inside this area. That, at least to me, makes a certain amount of sense. If anyone thinks that that should be different, just drop in a comment. I'm going to just edge that in slightly so that we know where our edge is. And then consider that there may have been some sort of office that has begun to collapse here. And it's sunk in, that the surrounds of this wall have all begun to collapse in on themselves and drop into water around here. That sort of makes sense, and it loosely edges along here until we reach the roots of this great tree. Now, for any of you that are in the previous streams, you'll know that this great tree is not just simply a tree. This tree is an ancient tree man that hasn't moved for a very long time. The flows of magic that pass through this area, that's attached to the old network of magic that spreads across the entirety of the known world, that's put in place by the elves thousands of years ago to drain magic from the Warhammer world. The reason being that there was such an influx of chaos at that point, demons everywhere, they had to do something to effectively end magic, or at least end magic as it once was, which was much more powerful than we see today. And indeed, if you've ever seen what Games Workshop did with the Warhammer world, when they moved it towards the end times and magic went wild, magic went way over the top and went crazy. They even released a book about it, The Storm of Magic. If you look at towards that, that's closer to what magic used to be before the great ritual was done by the elves to calm magic down. Now, in this particular area, the magic has become stuck because there's a waystone underneath this part of the city over here. And it has that magic over there sort of congealed and got it's got a bit stagnant and dar-laced, and it has become an overabundance of life magic in the area. And that magic would probably have once fueled this tree man that's currently outside of the flows of magic that are in the area. But his roots, or its roots, her roots, I mean, trees can be either gender depending upon the nature of what it requires. You should see Lindsay and her theory for Entwives, for example. Her theory about Entwives is actually super fascinating about what happened in Lord of the Rings. And her theory is that the Entwives didn't disappear, that all the Ents are in fact, and once were, the Entwives. It's quite a nice one. You should try and catch her online at some point about her theory regarding Entwives and what happened to them. That aside, the roots are down here, so we can have this part of the town here, still relatively above ground, but past that, it sinks badly. Sinks badly here, and the walls are sinking badly around this section too. So we've got our towers that we're marking for our walls here. We'll have one marked here too. Oops, brush on. I think I've just accidentally moved all the lines on the map by about half an inch. Yes, I did. There we go, just moved it back. Right, let's bring on our last tower. For reasons unknown to man, this is really slow, so let me just save that so the memory can stop holding the cache. We're probably going to need at least 2 more towers. In fact, we might want to have it collapse and have a proper security issue down at the side here. So this tower is leaning badly. The walls that connect to it have subsided almost entirely. They are held up in place with banks of wood, and worse, they've collapsed down. This section here could just be a wooden palisade rather than a proper stone wall, because most of it's sunk down into the marsh, and then we have the remainder of it going over here. Now, as we move on to any of the special locations, if anyone has any ideas for how they could manifest or be written up, please drop that into the comments. And the best of those can be collated and put together and become part of the World Anvil write-ups for these. I'm purposely going for a slightly wobbly line that doesn't look quite right, and I'm going to have that. That's where it's going to collapse down into the cracks in the stone. This entire area is probably a bit broken. And let's fill in this area. So if you're looking for mapping masterclasses, as I said before, there will be a mighty 4 of them over about starting on the 29th of this month over on Inside the Rookery. I'm doing a variety of teach you how to do stuff things for them, and I'm really quite looking forward to it. This is running very slow for reasons I don't quite get. My PC is old, and I will replace it at some point, but probably not till I finish Kalegen. There has been a concerted effort from certain parties to try and get me to move on after mapping Kalegen to mapping Altdorf, the capital of the empire. Now, you've got maps of Altdorf already, but most of those maps don't really match the text, particularly if you look at the current version where they're marked down as a city with about 1 million. The Reichsport is mentioned in various places, yet isn't on the map. The colleges of magic in the most current one are all placed in one part of the city where previously they've been everywhere else. And there's a desire from certain people for a map that matches the text versions. I'm going to have it nice and wide and weird looking here, suggesting that it's leaning stairs down to the side, quite like that. And I very well may do that, but I won't be able to unless I upgrade my PC, because this PC, for all I love it dearly, and it served me very well, and it has made more maps than I care to mention, it's now about 6 years old, and it may have all the RAM in the known universe, but it's still creaking at the seams, and it needs a good proper upgrade. And if I'm doing an Altdorf map, if we take a look at this, if I zoom out, this is for a city with approximately 15,000 people. At least that's the general idea for what we've pitched this as. If we're looking at a city of 1 million, you may notice if we're going at this level of detail, we'll probably be mapping it for 9 years, and it will be so much bigger than this. We're looking at what, 60 times bigger than this map, at least, maybe 70. That is a truly enormous map. And obviously, if we're going to do a map of Altdorf, we won't be able to do it to the same scale. We'll have to do it at a slightly different scale, shrunk down. And we'll just make sure that the scale makes sense for something that could potentially be created. If you consider a map for any city of any significant size, you've got to make sure that the scale is your primary concern. So instead of it mapping individual buildings, we'll probably map blocks and try to make them look individual and interesting and exciting when you map them out. But assuming I'm doing this, I'm going to need a new PC, because this one's creaking at the seams, running what is a relatively small map. This one here is, if you want to know the size of it currently, image size, it's only sitting about, just over 5,000 pixels by 5,000 pixels. So it's not the hugest one in the world. So yeah, I'll probably do that after we finish Kalegen. I'll take a look at my finances. We've for the Lawhammer streams, we're now up to around about 10, 11,000 pounds already spent on that. It turns out that it's really expensive buying new cameras and setting things up. It's literally being done just from my living room. But putting all the things into your living room turns out to be rather expensive. Had to buy a new PC for that as well. But that's a very different type of PC, one designed for all the streaming needs that we have, and also taking in all the multiple camera feeds that we've got running into it. We may end up having to drop the number of cameras that we originally planned because we're getting some stuttering just now. We've got some technical issues running in the background. We're not going to start streaming until everything runs smooth as butter. And I may have to drop down the number of cameras so that there isn't a clog up in whatever thing that's making my PC clog up. I'm getting freezes, not quite sure why. The laptop I have should be 20 times more powerful than needed for it. So I'm still tracing down what's up with that one. But we're almost there. We're doing another test tomorrow, and if that all goes well, we do our pre-stream session the week after that. Wow, time's just flying. And by that I mean we are going to have one stream that we're going to probably pop up for patrons for our all access ones, for those who want to see how our players get to the very first episode of The Enemy Within. And it's going to be a little bit, this is really annoying me how slowly this is running. I'm going to restart this. Excuse me while I go full screen and just restart my program in the background, because it's running slower than I prefer. So yeah, our streams are, what was I going to say? I've completely lost track because I've just restarted. Yeah, the cameras. We're going to have one session beforehand, and it's not going to be a properly presented hello, welcome to, and all the rest. It's just going to be, right, let's see how this goes. and just giving it a go to run a session. But it's going to be the last session between our pre-stream games, and we've played about 15 sessions before we go live, so that all the characters can get to know each other, the players can get to know the rules. There won't be stuttering and starts as we play because everyone will understand how it works. And we've nailed down where we are, what we're doing there. We'll do one episode to lead into the main show, and then we'll just start the show itself. We're going much bigger in this than your random or normal enemy within stream. We've got a hell of a lot of thought that's gone into not just the characters and why they're doing what they're doing, but the entirety of every single last stage of the way we're presenting the game. Let's see if this is running smoother. It already is. Marvelous. Right, let's double check my lines. Oh, that's better. Glad I restarted it. Right, that being the case, let's bring that up on screen and let's get going. Oh, I've got to represent. So share the screen, put on my new window, put on that one, and the map should appear anytime now. Now, there it is. Excellent. Right, let's get going. Before I go back in, let's just double check if there's any comments and then dive back into these lines again. Alexander adds, maybe at a construction site at the walls where they are doing repairs to the wall, damage is caused by flooding of the area and the underground becoming unstable. I think I would like to do that, but I think to add a slight twist to that, instead of making it inside the walls where we've got an established community that's going to be particularly difficult to shift, I think it's quite likely we can drop ourselves a camp on the outside that are responsible for trying to sort out the walls. But all of this area here is a mess, so they're having to boat their way over, or similarly get over this boggy, marshy area. So at the beginning, there might be a variety of planks laid down, and then it just sort of sinks down into full water. They might have made themselves a small semi-permanent jetty to help bring things over. There might be a small jetty over here as well where they can take in minerals or stone or anything else to try and fill the area, but it's just getting sunk. We could have a nice little adventure hook about them attempting to fill up the area with the slag and the detritus that's coming from the mining operations that have been brought down by barge, and they're expected to just fill up the area and for it to pack in, but instead it's just all sunk down, if anything, even further. And perhaps there's a reason for this. Perhaps down below the ground there is far damper underwater table down there. Perhaps there's a cave system that everything's flooding into. Perhaps there's something completely different. As long as it doesn't involve scaving, I'm up for any ideas that anyone might have for exactly why their attempts to fill in this area have failed. But I think doing that on the outside rather than the inside will give us enough space on the inside to make sure that we get enough of a feel of the community that we're building in there. Next up is Esty. Hello, Esty. Delighted you made it. Good evening, everyone, and good evening to you, Esty. So nice to see you in the comments. Alan says, a couple of days ago, there were reports of floods in Australia. Yeah, I saw that. And residents of one town being warned about crocodiles and snakes invading the town. Love it. Because something like that happened in Kalegen. Yeah, absolutely. And I see no reason why we can't have a point when the area becomes flooded, because there is far too many rains up in the mountains that are just on the east side. If I got the right way, yes, I do. The east side of Kalegen. And these mountains, the water's gone rumbling down. It's filled up the canals. It's caused them to overflow. They've spread out and sunk all the surrounding areas. We can get ourselves all manner of awfulness making its way down the canals from the various bogs and lakes that are further up toward the mountains and dropping in. So can we do something like that? Yes. And the best way to do that would be through an adventure hook. So, for example, if we have the canals written up as a location, one of the two adventure hooks for that canal could be the entire area has been flooded because of a big downfall of rain, and this is the things that have happened, and this is the way the PCs can be involved with it. And the biggest part of that would probably be to try and make sure that you include at least one other location in how that write-up is described, to ensure that whoever's using these adventure hooks can move from one part of the town to the next and effectively build a mini campaign without actually having to do any prep work as a GM beyond thinking about the circumstances that each location offers in terms of the paradigm of their game. So, for example, we could have the rat catchers, which we've already included over in this part of town up here. Our rat catcher, I think it's that one, or is it this one? Is it this one here? Someone will probably correct me that's sitting in the stream. We could have our rat catchers possibly getting recruited, or somebody suggesting that the rat catchers are involved, because they're often, particularly the more let's say, expensive side are often recruited to kill unwanted vermin of any kind, not just rats. And you've got to remember, in the Warhammer world, some rats are not small. We're talking proper huge things. You might not be able to see me because of the long comment as I peer over the top of the little Alan Steiner there. Hello. But some of them are proper enormous, giant rats. And it's not just tiny vermin that the rat catchers deal with in the Warhammer world. They're dealing with almost monstrous creatures, which means that they're often also hired to clear out any sort of creature that may have become infested, including potentially fenworms or equivalent. So yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yalabads, I don't think that the Empire has crocodiles traditionally. No, it does not, but it does have just about every other monster known to man. SD adds a stirpike in the boggy streets. Stirpike is big. Think of the stirpike as, if you know the pike as a fish, think of a great white shark level stirpike. I created them actually. Originally dropped them in as a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2 creature in the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Companion. That was released back about 2005-06, somewhere about then. And I wrote and co-wrote an article with Jodie McGregor, which was a whole bunch of extra creatures written up in a similar fashion to the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2 Bestiary, written by T.S. Lukert, which is a lovely loop to the beginning of the stream and what we were discussing there. At that point, I must have written about, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 fan-created parts for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2, because I was playing the game a lot and I was just creating the stuff and slapping it online over at Black Industries website. Black Industries was part of Black Library that published the game, and I was, let's say, I was part of the crew over there. So we just popped that up on their website. And yeah, that was a thing back in the day. So could there be a stirpike in there? I mean, it'd have to get in. It's a big fuck-off fish to be sweet about it, but yeah, it definitely could get in. Most likely to come in from the River Bergen, just over towards the west of the city, and perhaps we could tie that up with our floods, where a stirpike has got itself captured in one part of the canal somewhere and is causing havoc, because they're pretty big creatures. The Empire has lots of stuff in the water, though, says Alan Steiner. It certainly does. SD then adds, leads to it being dangerous to walk the old streets themselves, so they'd have to build bridges between the ruined houses instead. I mean, yes, that would absolutely be the case. I don't think you'd be able to easily move through the streets of this part of the city at all. They are flooded. It's a mess. Alexander then adds, I count myself among those who desire a new Altdorf map. Crowdfund your map-making computer. I'm not crowdfunding any further than the Lawhammer crowdfund itself. If you want to help us out in Lawhammer, feel free to do so. That is largely speaking to put together everything that I need to do the stream. And that could include a computer, right? Yeah, sure. Let's say yes. Alexander adds, perfection is the enemy of getting things done. Is that for our gigantic Altdorf map? I'm going to say that possibly it is, and you're absolutely correct. And Devin, hi Devin, great to see you here. Hey Andy, just drop in for a little bit. Sports ball match is starting soon. Totally understand, Devin. Sports ball is very important. Indeed, that's why we have a nice sports ball pitch sitting over there on our map. Okay, that's me down at the bottom of our comments, which I shall drop away like that. So I'm going to dive back in here. I'm going to break up parts of these walls, make it all a little bit messy, and then consider our primary streets and where they would have been. So what I'll do is, rather than do what I'd normally do, and you've seen the process if you've watched the previous streams, where I would drop in some roads, and I'd mark them out, and then I build up all the houses that sit in between. In this case, we're not really going to have roads. It's all going to be kind of watery and well, rubbish. So what instead I'll do is I'll mark in some, basically do the same thing by marking in some water. So let's go grab my water layer, which is hiding around here somewhere. There it is. Let's get myself a nice watery color, which is going to be around about there, I presume. Let's choose a different brush so that I can actually see that. Let's have a look at the color. That's close enough, right? And that one's slightly darker than that one. I'll change the color slightly just to match that. Yeah, that'll do. And I'm going to water this up for a bunch of potential roads and passageways. We'll add a variety of buildings on top of that, put our feature locations in place. Then we're probably good to go. So I'm going to go slightly smaller in my brush. And let's get this all in place. So originally, our roads would probably have gone down here. So there will have been a road going into this sort of direction there. There will have been one that went out here, so we'll form out of about there. This part of town has collapsed entirely down by the wall. This part of the wall has collapsed on both sides. So that's all going to be water. There will have been some around there. Let's curve off as parts collapse around that area. There would have been a wall running road there. Let's leave some of that off. Roots there. Okay, we're already getting a sort of idea of how this might work. If anyone's got any other ideas for any way that this area could be done, then do mention. Given that this is a relatively new built area, even though it is flooded, we're talking 50-ish or so years ago when it was initially planned and built, we can go for a more planned structure rather than that organic streets are formed up over time around the around what will in this case be the topography of the ground. In this case, it's going to be more planned and more of a gridiron look to it. And that has collapsed completely as the place has sunk. Okay, so I'm loosely happy with that as an area. As I said, if you've got any preference for how some of this should change, just drop it in as a comment and we'll take it. I will also take my road layer, which we have discussed more than once, and I will now connect the roads to the collapsed areas. So our road would have gone down there, like so. This road would have gone here, but the trees have buckled it all up. It's all messed up till it reaches about there. There's probably a new path that's wound its way around the tree at the base. There'll be a road that, not so much a road as in this entire area here is just going to be flattened out. Let's just mark that on now. There would have been a road that connected all the way around there, but that's all collapsed into water. So I can go back to my water layer and just fill in a touch more there to give the idea of how this is all falling apart. Back to my road layer. This would have connected that way. That's collapsed here. There'll be probably a building right there. Another one there. Is that enough? All that's collapsed. All that's collapsed. We can have a bit of the original road rising up above the water here. And maybe in a couple of other places as well, just to give that idea that there's bits of road left here and there. Stuff that we can just draw around or use as we prefer. Let's have something move into the main part of the town from the mid-ball field there and similar down towards that end. And I think that's probably enough for the roads. Don't think I'll do anything else on that. Right. That being the case, I'll go back to my lines layer and we'll start running over it. Now, as I said before, we're going to run around this part of town first, get that all into place. Let's get that on a black line here. Perfect. So I'm going to start drawing in those areas. If you've got any ideas for something that could be in that area, drop it into the comments as I'm going. I'm going to tidy up the lines where they now attack into where we've made some small changes. Oh, not quite. There's a little bit there too. Why aren't you deleting? I didn't draw on the long layer at some point, did I? I think I might have. There was a crime committed. There was. Look at that. All that big black lines there, not drawn on the right line. Bet it's the highlight layer. It's not. Okay. So what layer did I draw that on? I don't know. I will find that one out later, I suppose. Let me just get rid of everything there. Well, I pause for a moment and go, layer management is a very important part of drawing, and making sure you always draw on the right layer is, I didn't draw on the right layer there. Maybe I drew on the detailing layers up here when I was drawing the tree. Let's check. Yes, I did. Okay, that makes it super easy to fix. So that's the top layer, I'm going to presume. Yep, it is. So let's just get rid of that. Work our way around that. Perfect. And then get rid of that as well as we go down towards the lines. Cool. Right, let's get this area map. We've got our slightly broken, dodgy road that makes its way around the tree. There's some water that's gathered near the base there. I think I would like that to sink down further here. And then there. So I think that's enough of a lead into that area. We've got ourselves a pool here. We're going to need buildings that have collapsed in this area. So let's start putting in the positions of where they probably were. I will start off with just some loose boxes. for the delineation of where there originally would have been buildings, and we can collapse those by drawing them. I'm just moving around that one. Have part falling down, then we can connect them all with the walkways that we were discussing. So this is just to give us a general idea of where our buildings probably were. There would have been a building there. There would have been one there. We collapsed parts of those as well. Again, if anyone's got any ideas for this section, now is the time to bring them out. And that would have originally been some sort of back. I'm going to do, will I just do this section up to this wall here? I think so. So I'll leave the other side until I'm done. Okay, so that's loosely where I think the buildings would have been here. There would have been some back gardens, some walled off sections. Most of that's now sunk down, so most of this will actually be water. Now we put those in place, we can go back to our water layer and we can fill up some of that area for the obvious places that have sunk down into fenland. Oops, wrong color and wrong area. Pop that in there. That's I'm all going around these. Love it. And then we can start connecting all of these with walkways and similar. Yeah, that'll sort of make sense. I can sort of see how that works. Let's bring back my brush for drawing with. We're probably going to have something connecting over here and here so they can get through. There to there, there to there, there to there. This is dry land, so that doesn't need to be connected. We can have that collapsing, possibly there to there as well. That at least gives us a starting point. You get access to that sections there. Maybe one going right over, bridging over the entirety of it. That's a start. Before I just quickly pop those in, I'm going to quickly check the comments, see what they say. ST says, the release of the Illustrated book yesterday got me thinking about Lizardmen. Were the Slan ever active in the old world? Yes, they were. That's mentioned in various parts of the various historical versions of the Lizardmen, both in terms of ensuring that for the Warhammer game, your Lizardmen armies could justifiably fight off against your Empire or your Betonia or whatever. Indeed, entire campaigns to a certain degree were written to try and make sure that everyone could fight everyone. Take a look at, say, for example, the Gathering, what's its face one, the Albion campaign. The Albion campaign basically had the Lizardmen popping over to Albion because of their own reasons. Go read it up if you're particularly interested. And the Empire was setting up a new territory over there. Thyris Gorman, I think, was a large part of that over at Newland, as they were attempting to form a new empire province over in Albion. And all the other species were doing their own thing with the stories as well. So were they ever involved? They absolutely were. I find Lizardmen interesting. When we were planning out with Gav Thorpe the campaign that we were going to be doing called Pass of the Old Ones, that was the campaign that was supposed to be the sequel to The Enemy Within. And that campaign strongly included Lizardmen and various other stuff. But behind it all, there was a big, shall we say, half conversation about cultural appropriation and how the Lizardmen are basically someone else's culture and just turned into lizards, and just how that was wrong on so many levels, and what we were going to do to address that. That was a conversation. Not entirely sure whether that was or was not addressed in the current books. If somebody who's got it could share, that'd be interesting. It's a real issue. Games Workshop created a lot of these things back when cultural appropriation was not really on anybody's radar, particularly over in the UK. They weren't really thinking too much about whether their fantasy version of the undead was just ancient Egyptians and that was someone else's culture, and did that potentially harm some folk. In the ancient Egyptian case, the argument is, generally speaking, no, it's become such a part of popular culture in terms of mummies and ancient Egypt stuff being significantly beyond just Egypt itself. But equally, you say that, then someone else comes along and says, yeah, you can say that, and you might be able to say that in your happy little safe seat in Edinburgh. But down where I come from, the arguments concerning Egyptology and the appropriation of Egyptology by other cultures and how they just basically stole our stuff, made it their stuff, and now make money out of it is huge. And you shouldn't be doing that. And I'm quite convinced that that's a quite fair argument. So how to best balance that off in your books is, it's a toughie, particularly when you're dealing with somebody else's IP where they've already created it to be a particular thing. So keeping it true to its source material, but also being sensitive to the fact that that material has come from potentially not the best provenance, and that you could maybe handle it in a slightly more sensitive, more appropriate fashion. It's not hard, but it's easy to forget to do it. Our plan was half-baked at the point when I was doing the job, largely because it wasn't really needed yet. We were just at the point where we were starting the writing. Gav and I had already created the complete synopsis for the whole plot for Paths of the Old Ones and how that was going to be presented. And yeah, that was super fun. Indeed, if we finish the Enemy Within campaign for the Lawhammer streams, and we've concluded it and everybody's enjoyed themselves and they want to continue on, as I mentioned before, we'll probably run the Paths of the Old Ones after that, because it's effectively written. I actually contacted Gav before we decided whether we were going to do these streams or not. And I asked him if he minded if we ran it. And he was like, yeah, why would I mind? You wrote like as much of it as I did, and it was looking really cool, and it's better to have this stuff used than not. And I was like, oh, great, cool. Maybe we should do that then. So you might find us doing that in about a year and a half's time, assuming all goes well. So campaign number 2 would be Paths of the Old Ones and how that manifests. I think that could be an awful lot of fun, particularly given that by that time, the official product lists for the areas that we're going to be doing will largely be in place. So if there's anything that we want to use from those, we can do so. And we can also, you know, gently say, if you want to do this stuff, there's books, go buy them. Okay, so we're getting an idea of what this place is looking like now. It's not that large, and I think that's worth reiterating. We've got an entire area here. Let's get my scale so we can have a look at it. If I go up here, I think there's still the red boxes. Yeah, so those boxes there are around about 9 meters by 9 meters, about 10 yards by 10 yards. So you get an idea if I move down here that we're looking at around about, well, that's about 50, 60. It's about 150 to almost 200 yards, so about 180 meters. So it's a relatively big area. In that direction, that's around about 50, 60 yards. So we're looking around about 50 to almost 55 meters. So it's a relatively big area, but not too big that it dominates. We could possibly have a lot more people living here than maybe immediately expected, because of the crowded nature of the building, the fact that there's no rent being collected. So any old scoundrel could make their way to living down here without any major issue at all. Have a lot of this collapsed into place. Yep, love it. Maybe make this flat over here. So yeah, we could end up having a relatively sizable population in this area, numbering in maybe even thousands. Collapsed sections of building, bits on top. I'll see about adding a couple of obvious huts on top of some of these. I'll probably do that over in this section, give each part a slightly different character. So this one's mostly going to be collapsed old buildings, and this one here can be slightly more repurposed as a community. It's starting to build up in the local area that is unique to this part of the town, and stands quite separate to the rest of Kalegen. That to me makes a certain amount of sense. I'm going to get rid of the color underneath those on the blue. And while I'm here, just get rid of the excess water in areas where they're covered. All right, so for this section, do we have any ideas for stuff that we could drop in here? Locations. Do we want to have one of our locations that we've already discussed being here? So, for example, do we want to have our shop in this section? I think that possibly does make sense. We were discussing a shop near the beginning of the stream. That was one that was suggested by Martin over in the Discord channel, and we were discussing last week. So that's the curiosities. and the books that have gone all mouldery and horrible. So we could have something like that. Let's have this walkway below ground level. I mean, below the roof level, connecting parts above. Same here. So if you've got any idea for anything that could go here, bring it up now. If you don't, I will just start assigning these areas to certain things. And then I'll start the coloring, so we can get this all in place. Oh, this is a proper dirty area. I'm sort of loving how this looks. I'm imagining leaning, broken chimneys and shattered bits of roof, flattened areas, some different styles of walkway, some of them made of planks, some of them made of just bits of wall that have been repurposed. There's a method of connecting two parts of the buildings together. That'll be quite fun too. In fact, I'm going to twist that around and have it the other way around. I can sort of, I've changed brush by mistake there. I can sort of almost see it in my mind's eye. And that's, for me, quite an important part of the mapping process, is imagining in my head what it looks like and thinking, well, from above, that's going to look like that. And that bit's going to look like that. And how are we going to make all of these places look unique? Okay, have that go into a collapsed bit of wall there. I mean, roofing. Connect those. Okay, so we've got ourselves loosely this part of town almost done. Now is the time if you've got any ideas. And again, I don't mind if you're not sure what they should be because you might not know the setting well, or just because you've never done this before. Just if you've got any sort of idea at all, drop it in. If it works, I'll explain why. If it doesn't work, I'll, again, explain why. But I'm quite liking the look of these. At least one of these is going to have to be a special location, because we're going to have at least 3 or 4 special locations in this part of town. I can definitely see how this place is working, but I'm going to go over the comments. Well, we don't have too many, so it's going to be super easy. Janice or Janice, I'm still not sure which way to pronounce that. Pawn shop. Interesting. I think it's less likely we'll have a pawn shop because or not. I do think it's very likely we'll have someone who's working as a fence in the area. And by that, I mean someone who's taking in stolen goods and turning them back. So they could have this skein of acceptability, claiming they're a pawn shop, and maybe they even have the balls of a pawn shop, which in the Warhammer world is often associated with Handrich, the god of merchants and money gathering and similar. So they could have this skein of acceptability, but in fact, it's just the face of a relatively criminal outfit beyond the easily accessible lines of anyone in power inside Kalegen. And it's just an open trade on stolen goods. I think that would work really well. And perhaps it's set itself up as an entirely private, separate outfit. So none of the local gangs own or run this, but several of their members might be selling to it purely because it's easy money. So they steal from someone else and then bring it over and down into this area in return for coin and favors and similar. So that might work really quite nicely. We could potentially tie that in with other parts of the town where we've got some gangs running, where we've got some children's. And I recall actually you were responsible for much of the children's section in the upper slums. They could perhaps be running down here as well. That I think could work really nicely, actually. Janice Nens, I just arrived. Delighted to see you here. No idea what this area is, but it looks like a slum. It really is. So a pawn shop might fit in. Yes, this part is, we had slums just to the north, which I believe you saw us mapping to a degree just slightly further north. This is where the slums fall into complete boggy marsh and mire, and they're sinking down into the ground. Many of the buildings, which may originally have been multi-level, are now down to just maybe a single story or two. They're connected by walkways over the top, and it's just horrible. It's like stagnant water. There's probably infection and disease and all manner of horror going down here. And I'm pretty sure that nobody would really choose to live here if they could go and live elsewhere. This is very much the place of broken and shattered dreams, where those who have got nowhere else to go have gathered. And for those who are perhaps unable to go anywhere else because they're criminals or wanted or on the out from the Hallskrugs, could be a good place for a couple of NPCs who are political dissidents, who are hiding away from the worst that the city has, the best arguably, that the city has to offer because they're wanted, but don't want to leave for one reason or another. And it could just simply be they're too poor. There's all manner of different ways that we could possibly use that. So yeah, that's what it is. Alexander then adds, what do the people in this area do for a living? Why are they not moving somewhere else? Much like any poor area, they're probably scraping by, getting whatever food that they can. I won't go into deep detail as to how each individual may be living, mostly because individual games tend to answer the question of poverty in different ways. Some games prefer to do it in a hyper-realistic fashion. So you often find that slumlands are this unexpected home of industry of various types, cottage industries, churning out stuff in a desperate attempt to make some money to try and get out. But crime is also rife. There's all manner of gang and racketeering going on. So you can never be, it's hard to get away from this. You're pretty much an integral part of the overall criminal system, so to speak. It's hard to move out of these places, not just because you need money to do so, but because these places keep dragging you back because of your relationships, the people you know, whether that's family, whether that's friends. Some people just go for almost this comic level of slum, where they all just sort of lie around groaning, imbibing drugs, and doing very little else. And they don't have a living, not even using crime or theft or anything similar. And that's fine. You can create these slum areas any way that you want. In our world, as such as it is here, it'll probably be a nice mixture of things. So we're going to have drug problems down here, criminal problems, people with dreams of trying to get out, but inevitably being wrapped up with their existing relationships and not necessarily getting out in the way they want. Someone who possibly has been here since the beginning. It's only about 50 years old. So when this place was first built, it was seen to be something perhaps aspirational. So we've got some old folks who have managed to survive from the beginning, and they refuse to shift. Inside their house, it might be perfect in their little level, a lovely little townhouse that was once on the upper level and is now almost down by the water. And on the inside, it's almost prosaic. And that could be a fun thing. Maybe their grandchildren look after them. Maybe they're on the outs. Maybe crime is affecting them in a way that it didn't used to. You can make it up your own way. SD then adds, someone mentioned oysters growing in the bog in a previous stream. They did. So one of the buildings might run a racket of farming and gathering them. I think that's actually a good idea. We already have ourselves a bit of a pool building here. So that could be a good way of putting it. So this building here has become effectively an oyster farm centre of some form of oyster, perhaps a Warhammer equivalent of oyster. If I give it a back area that leads onto a road, let's pull out my roads copy here. We can have ourselves a relatively well guarded part of town there. Business works from the back. They've maybe got oyster sellers who work across town, a whole bunch of hawkers who will have hats with big shells on them, perhaps, and they're selling hot oysters for sale or some equivalent. Perhaps they get boiled on the spot in some sort of mobile stove with coals underneath it, and they're just dropping them in and cooking them to need. Yeah, there could be all manner of fun that you could try there. Plus, if we have a variety of oyster sellers across town that pulls back to here, that's a method of potentially taking your PCs from another part of town to here, or just introducing this part of town. So say, for example, they're coming into Kalegen for the first time at the docks, and they see an oyster seller or whatever we decide it is that they're selling. And they can have their various accoutrements that show what exactly they're doing and why. And the PC speak to them, and they might even say, "Where are you getting them from? Oysters here? Where? How does that make sense?" And they can say that there's another part of town over there where they're gathered. That's who they work for, and it's a way to potentially introduce parts of town that the PCs will come to later. Even if it's 5, 10, 15 sessions later, it's already been established inside your game world. So by the time that they get there, they're moving into an area that they almost expect and have had foreshadowed. And that's broadly speaking, a slightly better way than just having and now I want the PCs to go to this part of town. What's there? Let's find out when I get there. Always having those little hints and tips put out there before they get to the place you're going to just adds to the depth of the game in general. So, yeah, let's make that this location. I'm going to add a couple of side sheds, a little jetty to the front of it that they can attach boats to and similar. I quite like that. Okay, so that's location for our oyster farm. Any other ideas for locations in this place? If so, drop it into the comments. I'll finish off the comments that we have. Janice adds, that is what I meant. Pawn shop as a cover, maybe even hiring out messenger children. Yeah, absolutely. Agreed completely. I think that works really well. So looking at the map, let's drop in our pawn shop. I think we need to have it somewhere that's easily accessible from the main road. And indeed, as crowds gather, perhaps to watch a little midden ball game, you can slip off and perhaps steal some stolen goods. And maybe even one of the fences makes their way up there and speaks to their contacts as the crowds are gathering. So under the cover of those crowds, can then do some business, drag some people down, and take them down to the buildings that are down here, where this criminal outfit, this fence, who is effectively one of the local crime lords, is plying his or her trade. I like that quite a lot. So you're probably looking at about there-ish. So maybe that one, maybe both of these actually, as you then move into that part out, or maybe just that one. So it's isolated by itself with a small jetty at the back, allowing them to take things over to that part of town without any difficulty. I quite like that too. So I think that place makes the most sense. Our pawn shop, for want of a better description. Alexander then goes, while I like the topography of the area, I still have no feeling for what the economics, culture, and daily life is around here. If they would have proper work, they would just move out there. I don't think they have proper work. I think they're working here. And trying to scrape their livings together here. As to what exactly that means for your game is largely for yourself. Some will be oyster catchers, some of them will be professional criminals, some of them will be trying to get out of that professional criminal thing, some of them will just be old with family supporting them because this is an old part of town. Some of them will just be the destitute, those who are running, those who are surviving off of drugs and little else, and then stealing whatever they can to try and fund their habits. It's going to be a big mixture of different people. Indeed, if you want an idea, just check any of the lower slumlands of any part of the world, take the bits you like and pop it in. Janice then says, any gods, priests with a healing the poor outreach mission mentality? Yes, there is. In the Warhammer world, there's a cult of a goddess called Shalia. Shalia is typically depicted dressed in white with tears constantly flooding down her face for all of the great horrors that the world has to offer. And the fact that she can't give mercy to all of them at any one point. There are other stories as to why she cries, but that's all down to the mythology of the Warhammer world. Her priestesses mostly, there's occasionally male priests of Shalia, but they are very much in the minority. They tend to people, generally speaking, for free. Donations are very common. And they often set up mercy houses in the worst parts of town. And we're intending over here, indeed, you might be able to read the word. It's very badly written in my awful handwriting, mercy house. We're going to have one of them over here, which was originally set up to be this big grand affair, but has collapsed and sunk, and now probably no longer is a mercy house. The place is officially owned by the Cult of Shalia, but the Cult of Shalia, which has its roots elsewhere in the city, if I go out all the way up here, a third of this building here, as I recall, is taken over by the cult. They probably occasionally send folks down here, but not very often. We could maybe even have an adventure hook from the other place up there about trying to reclaim this mercy house for Shalia, to re-sanctify it and bring it back into the fold and perhaps use it to administer to the poor in the area and help the disease, because disease is almost certainly spread out from here more than once. And disease is very much at the core of everything that Shalians hate. Indeed, in the Warhammer world, there's a chaos god of disease, one of the primary big four bad guy gods called Nurgle. And Nurgle is the god of disease and hated completely by Shalians. They fight pretty much incessantly a war against Nurgle, and it's about the only time you'll see the pacifist Shalians potentially roll up their sleeves of their bloody aprons and go, I think it's time for us to, do something about this. So that's Shalia. So they definitely fit in to this area really well. SD then adds, maybe the pawn shop is also selling his services as an investigator who will find your stolen goods for a price, so he just sells the stolen goods back to victims. Yes, SD, we've discussed this loosely in the past in some of the other streams, and I agree completely. I think that our pawn shop will have deals with most of the local investigators. As in, your goods have gone missing, come to me, I'm very likely to have them, and for a price, you'll get your goods back. And it's a good way of trying to put an acceptable face on the cycle of goods between the thieves and those who are rich and want their stuff back. So, yeah, agreed completely on that one. I think that'd also make for an interesting set of adventure hooks. Or alternatively, a set of links between the investigator locations that we have moving down towards the fence locations in the south, and potentially using the PCs, pardon me, to bridge that gap and move from one place to the other, either carrying goods, fetching goods from a particular promissory note or something similar that they've been given. Yeah, I think that works really well. ISD adds, is there such a thing as a professional midden ball player? If so, professional sports players is a classic get out of the slum dream. It is, and this is very much down to your individual setting. Some people don't even like the idea of midden ball at all, because the idea of an organized sport, even if it's a disorganized organization, just still goes against their idea of what the Warhammer world represents. Even though sport, in some fashion or another, has been part of the Warhammer world since its first edition back in the 80s. If you take, for example, Snotball, that was played up in Middenheim, the very north of the Empire. Snotball effectively was, to a degree, renamed Midden Ball. It's basically just Snotball, but a little bit more organized. And Snotball is kind of illegal because you're dealing with a snotling, and that's not a good thing. In this particular case, it exists. Is it professional? No, not really. It's at the very best, it's pub stuff. Pub teams and individuals, or alternatively, those who use Midden Ball as a training supplement. So, for example, certain Ulrican temples will use Midden Ball as a way of getting their initiates to fight, but in a non-lethal way, because they're punching about and they've got a particular target. In some respects, it's like a mini war, and their version of Midden Ball is particularly, let's say, aggressive. Where the Cult of Sigmar will use it for team building reasons. It is, however, as a sport, mostly a Middenland-based one, but it has seeped down into northern Reikland and elsewhere. Are they professional? As we judge it by modern standards, I would say absolutely not. But is there folks in some of the big cities that are like the equivalent of gladiators in Rome, for example? I think the answer is probably yes, unless you decide Midden Ball's not like that in your setting. For my version of Midden Ball, yeah, probably there's going to be some people who are the equivalents of, say, the Jacob von Altdorfs in Blood Bowl, relatively famous individuals who have managed to get an awful lot of people aware of them because they have played in matches that a lot of people have seen and they have been successful. So are they professional per se? Probably not. They might be knights or soldiers or some other career that they're doing, but that doesn't mean that they don't, gain many of the benefits that you would see as a professional player. Now, looking at this part, would they use that as a get out of the slum dream? Here, I doubt it. But I do think that the Temple of Sigmar could bring a sense of camaraderie and kinship, a community for people who are from this very poor part down to just the south here. So taking the young kids and getting them playing Midden Ball in the field and getting them working together, many of whom may be traditionally enemies because they come from different families or they come from different factions here. And the priest or priestess of Sigmar that's working from here will be very keen at trying to build that sense of local community, not just building the militias should the city be attacked and require folk to be able to man the walls with a shield and a pot or a pan or whatever they can afford to bring to the battle, but to actually try and help make the community of the Empire better. That's something that lies at the very core of Sigmarism, the cult of Sigmar. So I don't think it's necessarily a get out of the slum dream, but the priest may be using it as a method to try and get them out of their slum-like attitudes and the criminality that might come from there. And there could be some really good adventure hooks that move into that. Or more depressingly, pit fighter. In fact, yes, I sort of alluded to that. Humans are willing to sacrifice a lot for their health and the better life, and I agree completely. And I think that there very possibly should be here some form of, if not pit fighting per se, there's going to be pit fighters here. There's going to be some form of desperate people looking to get cash and willing to do almost anything to do it. And we're not just talking about your standard low-key mercenaries and thieves and prostitutes and whatever else it might be, but people who are actually putting their life on the line, and not just because they're guarding something. And we even have if we got to the north here, a large, relatively open pit up in the north of the city here, where the biggest, most successful fights will be played out. This place is run by ogres who culturally have a deep history of pit fighting. They indeed brought the concept of the pit fight into the old world. They took it from the mountains of Mourne far, far, far to the east. The ogre community is very much about that conflict and besting other people. And I think that definitely should have some form of reflection down here, even if it's just in the general commentary for the overall district and not, for example, in a specific location. Alexander then adds, maybe some treasure divers will start trying to get something out of the half-sunken buildings of the more wealthy, but the buildings are picked mostly clean. Maybe some of the divers try to offer their services to people who want to reclaim stuff from the sunken ships. Like that particularly works well with our oyster idea as well. The idea that there's treasure sitting under the water gives an excuse for PCs to possibly go down there. What if one of the nobles, for example, is aware of one of their relatives who 30 years ago lived in one of those houses? That house is sunk. That's disappeared. That noble wants the stuff back. Goes and says, hey, PCs, go fix this. They get down there, and there's various different routes they could try to do that. They could do it themselves. They could try and hire some people from the oyster farm, or they could try and hire some locals that could get them embroiled in some local problems. Yeah, there's lots of ways we could do that, and I really quite like that as an idea. Esty then adds, the slums should definitely use one of the buildings as an underground pit fighting boxing ring then. Yeah, I think so too. And I think possibly want to move that into the place where it's beginning to form its own community. So let's add that into that section. Right, I've done enough for the moment. In fact, no, there's one more comment from Esty. You caught me just in time. So I'll just read these ones quickly and then I'll get into colouring this in. Where the gangs could run it with betting, maybe fewer rules for the fights. Definitely. And drop some desperate, Alexander then adds, drop some desperate into the pool with a stir pike or something. Oh, you could actually have a, oh, in fact, no, you've changed my view here. You could have a multi-tiered pit in that you've got your higher level pit, which is your above water, and then you go down to your pool, where you fight all manner of watery beasties. So you could get amoebas and stir pikes or anything else that you get their hands on. Maybe a big fen worm that has gathered down there that they've captured. And maybe the fen worm that's living in the waters outside now is one that actually escaped and was captured here originally and has managed to worm its way down into the buildings underneath and find its own little nest down there where it's relatively safe. I think all of that makes a lot of sense. So we've got a multi-tiered pit fighting arena effectively with our watery one right at the basement. That is pretty horrible. And then, ooh, evil, says Esty. Yeah, I really quite like it. I didn't finish off your comment, by the way, which was something, who kills it, survives it, will get prize money. Yeah, I agree completely. So I'm definitely adding that to that location. Let's start colouring in this area so we can see it. As before, our locations will be marked out in purple and our primary buildings will be marked out in brown. We've got ourselves one location here, which is going to be our fence stroke or slash rather than stroke, because stroke's a bit of a dodgy word sometimes. Criminal pawn shop. We've got ourselves our oyster farm up here. Do we have one other location here? Are we happy with two? I think I'm happy with two, unless anyone's got something that says that it should definitely go in there. I think I'm happy with two. I'll start on the building color. When I've done all the building cover, I'll jump back into the comments. So if you've got anything that you think you'd like to add while I'm sorting out this section, do so. I'm just looking at how these are all connected and what's the likelihood of any of these being locations beyond just local awfulness. And all of them could be for one reason or another. But do we really need another one in this location, or are we quite happy we can put in the other special locations in the other 2/3 of this area that we're mapping out just now? I'm of two minds in this one. I do, however, like how this place is beginning to build. We're getting a strong sense of the people that live here. Strong sense of the criminality, the lower classes, mixture of different types of folks living together. we're probably looking at an almost entirely human and halfling population. The halfling population will be made up of the Lost Pockets. That's effectively the clanless halflings. So these are beggars, outcasts, and otherwise outside the standard society sets of halflings. Maybe a few ogres living down here as well. Ogres do like to wander and get away from other folks. And they often find themselves in the poorer parts of town. One of them might be associated with the pit that we're about to build. And that's already beginning to look pretty decent. I'm going to put in the wall color. Where's my wall color? There. Oops, I went well out my lines there. Very poor form. Let me just tidy that up. Do I want to go further yet? I'll do this section as well. That stone wall collapsing down to a wooden section. And I'll just quickly, oops. Actually, why not? Let's make one of the towers a feature tower. Since I've colored it in purple, it will be, we'll make some details for that one when we do it. Let's add in that one. Oops, wall color, please. Whoa. There. Add that in. Yeah, that's pretty decent. Let's go building color, pop in our last tower here. And then once I've done this little section, I shall pop into the comments, pull them all out. And if nothing comes of those in terms of new locations, I'll just do the highlights and shadings and we'll be done with this section. But if something else comes of it, I'll do whatever changes are required. So let's have a quick look. Alexander adds, and sometimes the femworms return to the area and snap away the winner. The arena and snap away the winner. Do quite like the idea of this arena. Pretty sure we have Marienburger Gangs running the south side of the city. Yes, we do. They're marked up over there. They'll probably be familiar with water-based nasty things, so the fighting pit makes sense. I agree, and I think they probably have a pretty good relationship with the folks down here. Yeah, that works quite well in terms of the overall tone of the area. Yalb then adds, and I think we start to have an interesting thing running between different sections of the town and different types of blood sport manifest. I agree. I think it's added quite a nice bit of color to the area. We have, however, reached the end of the comments, so I'm quite happy just diving into the highlights and shades for this area. And a lot of these bits are going to be relatively big. Let me just pop that up to the walls. This is going to be a bit more complicated to highlight and shade than the other buildings that we've done so far, largely because there's lots of different sort of layers of how the building manifests there. So I'm going to take my time a little bit here, more than I normally would, to try and make sure that this all makes sense. Much like before, I won't be detailing the shadows outside the walls. We'll leave that to when we do the outside the wall sections. That's all going to be in shadow. Let's drop that down there. As is that. This entire area will be in shadow, as will that. Okay. Shadow there, shadow there, shadow there. Okay, now that's beginning to make sense. I can sort of feel this. Big one here. That's a big building. Shadow on that side, shadow on that side. Sink that in. Okay, that's us pretty much done most of this. Wasn't too hard. Not too much to do there. Now let's get our highlights in place. And once I've done that, I'll check if there's any other comments. And if not, we'll just dive straight into the next part of town. So let's just quickly do these. Again, if you want to know how I'm doing this or why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it, we have a tutorial for that over on Inside the Rookery where I explained every single process behind how I made this style of map. I am only using the techniques that I showed in that tutorial. I'm not doing anything special on top of it. This is not one of those. Am I in the right layer? Yes, I am. This is not one of those. There's a special secret to how we're doing this, streams. The exact opposite is the case. Everything that I'm doing here has been shown elsewhere. I'm just quickly doing some of the basic highlights in these buildings as well, since I missed them last time. There we go. Right, and highlight there, highlight there, there. Okay. I think we are almost in business down in this part of town. I think we're done. Unless there's anything anyone else thinks you go in there. If so, drop it into the comment as always. But I think I'm quite happy with how this part is formed up. We've got a real sense of what this looks like. I've got a pretty good sense for the slowly building society that this area has and how it's beginning to manifest. And that is that part of town. Excellent. We're shading parts of this to give the idea that things have happened in there. There we go. That'll do. Right, okay, one down of our 3 sections that we're doing here. We're about to move into the second one. The second section is a bit more established in terms of the community, and we're probably going to change some of the houses on top so that they're a bit more of a shanty town laying on top of the original buildings, which are laying on top of the lower sections that have completely collapsed underneath the marshes and the water and the lower pit fight that we've got down there too, and all other stuff. We'll do that in this central section. And this last section over here is where the richer buildings were going to be placed originally. And they've also all collapsed, one of which will be the Mercy House to the cult of Shalia, the goddess of mercy. And I think that's the lot. Is there any other type of building we're going to include? There was one that Martin mentioned over on Discord, and that was a shop. That's lower levels have collapsed. Let's add that as well, and we can pop that up on one of the street level sides there. So I think we're kind of cool with that. Right, I'll check if there's any comments before I start drawing in this section. First one is Yalab, who says, so halfling clans? Indeed. Are the halflings within a clan closely related? That is a very complicated question to answer. Or is it more a grouping of different actual families adopting a common name? Is it possible to move from one clan to another? Right. So this is to a degree being covered. I commissioned Andy Lease to write up an article about halflings for what is now the first archives book for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I think it's the first one where the halflings got added. And loosely speaking, your family is determined in halfling society by your clan, pardon me, is determined in halfling society by your mum. And that's largely because you can never be certain who your dad is, but you can be pretty certain who your mum is. And halflings are very much in each other's pockets at all times. The average halfling building will contain one very large family, often numbering in a household that would have maybe 8 to 10 humans in it. It might have as many as 50 halflings. They live in each other's pockets at all times. They're very much unlike the Lord of the Rings style, almost gentrified version of our little halflings all living in their little cottages, which extend deep inside mountains or some equivalent. Hills would be better than mountains, and have lots of civilized rooms and special times for tea and all the rest of it. No. Halflings, though, are very concerned about their genealogy, and they don't really care too much about their fathers particularly, although it's nice to know. They do care about their matrilineal lines, and that's where they get their clans from. You never truly leave your clan, even if you marry into others. In our versions of halflings, polygamy is common. Having multiple husbands and wives is common. Living with one or more of your families is also common. Moving from house to house to house to house. They are not like humans in terms of their base core society. Humans could be like that in the way that humans can be almost anyway. Indeed, so can halflings. But we're talking about generalisms here. So loosely speaking, to answer your questions directly, are halflings within a clan closely related? Yes, and they generally know how closely related. They're very keen on genealogy. The Halfenlever, which was mentioned inside the core book, is the big, huge halfling genealogy book. They are very concerned about tracing exact families. As to why that's the case, we didn't mention it in the book, but we had one for our game. and we also had one that we're intending to write in later. Pretty sure it didn't get written into the article that Andy wrote, though. Is it more of a grouping of actual families adopting a common name? No, it's not an adoption of a name. They know their clans and they know their relationships to each other. And for all I make loose jokes about not knowing their fathers, that's just not true. It's a bad stereotype, and I should be a bit more careful of that. They are quite aware of their family backgrounds. Is it possible to move from one clan to another? Not really. You're always going to be of your clan. You can marry into other clans, but that doesn't change your clan. That doesn't change your bloodline. Clan is about bloodline. It's about where you come from. It's about your family. It's not necessarily about who you marry, have sex with, or any other thing, or who you're living with. But the clan groupings tend to work together very, very closely, loosely speaking. Janice the Nad, got a rag and bone merchant anywhere? Yes, we do. Maybe associated with a papermaker or yarn mill. Yes, we've got a rag and bone one working from up here. I don't know if you can see my thing there, and all the detritus from the city is pooled and gathered in this location here. And they are running through that, and various bone pickers are attempting to scrape what livings they can from that. I imagine folks from this part of the town are probably going up there attempting to rake through that mulch as well. So yeah, that's definitely going. As our papermaker and yarn mills, we didn't do that at that point. That is a good question. And I think that's possibly one we should answer. Because if you're going to be getting yourself lots of secondhand bits and bobs, I don't want to put it here because we've already loosely detailed what's here. But I definitely think that we're going to need to have some of that detritus being sold off and repurposed and reused. So possibly we could build that directly into our second slum area, which you may notice in the middle of the screen there. Slum! Or it's a bit close to scum. That area there, and we can have some of the detritus gathering there and certain parts of it being sold off there, and rag and bone pickers picking it up from there and making the hike across town. It's not that long. It's only about 400 or 500 yards, meters or equivalent, and selling it over there for whatever pfennigs they can get and secure for it. I think that's a really good idea indeed. I like it so much, and I don't want to forget it, that I'm going to do another one of my crappy notes and write paper, and then I think maybe I want to separate the shitty yarn from the good stuff. I'll maybe pop that about here. No, I think we've got our main part collapsed into slum in that direction. We'll have it just off, maybe have them sitting opposite each other. We can build some guild rivalry between the two. Paper and yarn, done. Okay, that's that added. Right, we've had nothing specifically added into this section, so I'm just going to start drawing it into place now. I'm going to do probably about half of it, and if you've got any ideas, I will probably add to that that I've drawn so far, or just add it to the bit that I've not drawn yet. So I'm going to do exactly the same as I did last time. I'm going to start with some basic boxes to show where the original buildings probably were. I'll do them in light. And I won't worry too much about them being particularly well built examples of what they are. Some of these have obviously collapsed and fallen apart. And then I will detail in each one of these areas properly. And then we can try and connect some of them with walkways, much as we suggested before. And some of these would have been land out at the back. So I'm only going to do this section and this section just now. And then this will be the third section that I do over here. Now we can get rid of the housing for the poor. Originally, this section here was going to be, this particular part here was being set up as a tenement for housing for the poor. So let's have a big U-shaped tenement that has sort of collapsed completely here. So this would originally have been a very large building, maybe as many as 5 stories high, and it is, of all of them, has sunk the most because it was one of the heaviest. Even though it's quite close there, it will cause subsidence and probably has broken this part of the canal multiple times with the excess weight dragging down at that side. We can have an internal courtyard there. There would have been a road on the outside there and there, so we're connected with roads fine enough. Slightly better buildings and shops connecting over on the other side, and we can connect some of those with walkways. I think we've got our basic squares in place. Before no, we've got the top here. I'll put those in place as well. As we have buildings that are still in good nick. Possibly one of these is a building with two faces, so to speak. So on this face, it is respectable and facing into the large building area. But on this face, it's not respectable and they're doing dodgy dealings out the back. That could be an interesting location if anyone can think of how that might manifest and be different from, say, the fence. What sort of dodgy dealings or equivalent could we have there that makes sense? We can have one house that's sort of rising up, a bunch of ruins in the back here that were once buildings. Right, I'm pretty happy with where my boxes are before I start detailing that in. I'll check if there's any comments. We have 3 quick ones from Oxecutor. Hi, Oxecutor. Could that double up as a workhouse, as in the yarn and paper mills? Yeah, I definitely think it probably could. And you might find that there may have been either a deal struck with the guild that's responsible for it, or alternatively, the business is owned by one of the local ruling families. And that deal will have been struck with the courts where possibly they can work off a certain amount of their time in a workhouse for various criminal activities they may have been, well, accused of and judged guilty for, whether they did or not. That's in reference to paper and yarn mills. Yes, I gathered that, Oxecutor. And then adds, by the old barge building dock, could one of the walkways be a collapsed crane? It's a damn fine idea. Yes, they definitely could. And let's pop that into place here. Put on some basic shaping to that so we can see exactly how it goes. And that's connecting through to that side. So we've got no other comments. I'll make sure I've taken that off. I have. So I'm just going to start detailing it out from the bottom, working my way up. As I said, I'll probably do about half of it before I check back to the comments. If you've got any idea for any locations, please type them into the comments now. If you've got any idea for how we could do maybe a double-facing building up there with one frontage to one side and another frontage to the other side, do bring it up. If you can bring that in, for those of you who know your Warhammer lore, if you can bring that into some sort of two-faced version that's not Renald, the goddess, the god or goddess, depending upon which version you use of that god, it doesn't rely on that god because we used Renald heavily elsewhere in the city. But if you can think of a good two-faced thing going on there, something related to twins or something else, feel free to drop that in. I shall start down at the bottom and work my way up, as I said. So, starting here, this building is messed up and broken. It has a new building or two on its top. Some lean-tos, huts, built upon shattered remnants, an old chimney. Yeah, okay, getting an idea for that one. This then connects to the original roofing that's still in place here, collapsing slightly as it goes down. Similarly, we've got another building here, a ramp going down towards that, broken completely with parts of its roof still in existence there, falling into shadow on that side. And then we have another building there with a couple of buildings atop it. Then we built a walkway connecting these two. Okay, so that's number one. I'm also going to get my, well, I'll do all the water at the end. Right, so we've got this one now. Now, I suggested it was originally there, so we can actually have this building collapse and possibly at an angle. So it's down that way. We're going to see a chunk of the back end of the building as it's sunk in. Collapsing there. We have the roofing, which will sit up like so. Hanging into a broken section there. And we can get rid of that. This building would have been here. Let's have it go into an open section, a building on top. We also have to think about where exactly we're going to place our pit here. So you've got any ideas for where the pit could potentially go, our fighting pit? I'm thinking maybe here, since we've got an obvious open area for water there, But if anyone has a preference for it being elsewhere, do tell me and I will get on that. Let's drop that one at a bit of an angle as well. A different angle. Bits of building rising out of the water in places. Okay, over here, first section, we'll have one building that's built on it, then it's just open walkways connecting each of them. We'll have a walkway going over here too. Parts of the old road visible here. So that rises up out of the mulch so that all collapses down there. Into our main block, as I say, I think this is probably where we're going to want to have our fighting pit. We could even have the main pit sitting out in the open at the top. We want this pit to be around about, I don't know, about 8, 9, 10 yards meters, around about that. So let me just bring up the scale. Show grid. Okay, so it's actually particularly difficult to see on this section. I'm going to pull out a little bit so I can see it a bit better because it's all by pixel here. So 10 yards is going to be around about, oh, I can't even see it on this one. Let me just, there, I can see it much more clearly there. So 10 yards is about that by that. Okay, so yeah, that's about the right size. That's around about 9 yards across, 8 meters. It's big enough for us to get ourselves a pretty good fight. And we have enough space around the edges here where folks can gather, bet, watch. And then down here, we have ourselves a second pit open to the elements, possibly with the equivalent of some form of grandstand where people are looking down. The chap who is responsible for it all, looking down into the second pit. So pit number 1 and pit number 2 both shown, and then possibly another one sitting in a lower level underneath. So we've got multiple levels of pit working in the same area. That's quite fun. Let's move over here to one of the better sections of the building, but we'll have it collapsed there. We'll have another building here that's collapsed almost entirely at the edge. Love it. Maybe a walkway connecting both of those. Open at one side, going into the building at the other side. Another walkway connecting these two sections. Again, free on one side, not the other. Building sitting top. Multiple layers here too. Long area. Let's make that whole thing built up. Originally a roof there, that's collapsed, and here that's also collapsed. Bits of buildings standing out where once it was whole, but no longer. Okay, we have our connection point here, opening up onto this building, which is going to be mostly flat. Okay, we're about halfway. We've definitely got some sections in there. Just before I join in on the chat again, if you've got any comments, I'm going to quickly sort out the new versions of our water that we've now got in place. Make sure that that is all properly colored in. I'm going to get a slightly bigger brush because this one's rubbish. Slightly better. Fill that in there and fill it in here so we can see the waterways. Lovely. Looks like a lovely place to live. A modern day Venice. Well, fantasy Venice. 100% would visit. I mean, who doesn't want to go to a slum where you might get eaten just for passing through it? Sounds perfect. Just take off these little bits here. Yeah. Calling that a win. Okay, let's check if there's any comments. And then about excellent, there's hardly anything. Did we say this one already? Claps crane, yes we did. So Executor then moves on. In the fighting pond, maybe a crow's nest for the referee and a rope bridge to get it. Who doesn't like the idea of a freaking crow's nest? Yeah, I think that's a fine idea. Adds a certain nautical flair to the whole thing as well. Perhaps tying back to our Marienburg gang references. all of that seems to work relatively well. For those of you who don't know, Marienburg is the biggest city in the old world, a city of at least 1 million, probably about 1,200,000, if not more. And it's right at the mouth of the River Reik, and surrounded by marshlands, and is built across islands, and its people are noted for their maritime excellence. So let's pop it back there. I think my brush is way too big. Yes, it is. Size 4, please. And let's have a slight angle working from there. It's very simple, but we can use that as the almost an overlooking area. Yeah, kind of love that. Okay, so quickly just pull in the sides of this so it's a bit clearer. Get rid of the extras. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. Okay, so we didn't have any more comments there, so I'm just going to start moving into the second section now. Again, if you've got any comments for anything that could go in this second section, do drop them in. If you've got any ideas, be that what you may think is crazy or not, bring them up and I will assess them and put the ones in. Right, first, we've got here our big sinking tenement house for the poor, which is almost certainly broken and cracked in multiple areas, with sections of it open completely to the elements. Originally a very ambitious work over multiple layers, a relatively impressive architect brought in to house the poor, to show just why this city is forward thinking, unlike, say, Altdorf, the capital. And the truth being that within a couple of decades, the whole thing had begun to collapse, not because it was built badly, but because of the poor water management for the water table and a lack of care from the ruling nobility about rehousing these folks later. Inside, it's probably like a big block of flats that may have been built, say, back, if you're looking at the UK side of things, maybe built back in the 60s, 70s, maybe even a bit earlier, to be the new way of living, all in one giant space, with a nice little bit of land sitting on the outside, which is now fallen into water and disrepair. And now a mixture of disenfranchised youths, people who've got work elsewhere and can't afford to leave, or some equivalent to that. Yeah, like that. Moving up towards the barge building area. This would originally have been an important office, but it's also collapsed with its lower layers. It would have originally had its own back lot for holding things, but that's also sort of collapsed. Ruins off towards here, bits of old building and places that might have been, balanced off with actual buildings with a decent frontage up here. New makeshift hovel that has been put in place. Let's get my road layer and just put a quick, put a quick path up to that. Like it. And lines. There we go. Get rid of that little bit there. Just on the edge of respectability here. Pretty rubbishy piece of land in general, though. Okay, so that leads us with just this section left here to go. I will quickly check the comments before I do that one section, then jump in. Janice pops in and says, I'm away. It was delightful to have you. I'll take my van into the garage for service. Well, good luck with the van. Map's looking great. Thank you very much. I'm enjoying seeing it emerge from the collective chaos of ideas. Yeah, so am I. It's a fun process. And I don't really think anyone else is doing this. We're just taking ideas as we go and slapping them on the map and slowly building something that I think is really very unique. It's a collective endeavor that I'm enjoying a lot. Oh, and another idea for this area, excellent. Seamstress who takes in mending and specializes in remaking old clothes into new ones, maybe wealthy folks' cast-offs. Yeah, cheap seamstress down here. In fact, maybe that should be our double-faced one on the front side. She's got herself an actual window with a lovely frontage, and a variety of rather good-looking, sometimes too good-looking, frocks, dresses, coats that are presented for the middle to potentially upper classes, whilst out the back she's doing quite the trade in stolen articles of clothing, and parts that are taken from the pets, the rag and bone areas, things that she's had stolen there. Maybe she's tied in with a lot of the local handkerchief thieves, because we all know that everyone's trying to steal handkerchiefs. So we could possibly tie it in with that as well. Basically, any old material, she's willing to get it. And she can perhaps be someone who's got a very respectable, forward-thinking face, but behind the scenes is actually somebody who is quite different. So let's make that this location here. That could be quite fun. Executor adds to that. Maybe some of those clothes can be liberated from the Mourners Guild. That's a good idea. So the Mourners Guild are effectively the Undertakers, and they have very strong ties to the cult of Mor, the god of death. And the Mourners Guild are responsible for keeping all of these artifacts carefully protected before any burials or equivalent take place. So we could possibly have a dodgy member of that Mourners Guild as well, doing a good line in stripping bodies before they're buried, and possibly have that come out as an adventure hook. So when a cask is getting lowered, it slips to one side and the body rolls out, and the body's naked. And shock and horror as all of the various gathering mourners look on, going, what the? The Mourners Guild are also responsible for gathering mourners for those who may not have mourners. So there may be about 10 or 15 mourners who have been employed by the Mourners Guild just to turn up and be faces to look sad when this person's getting buried. Maybe one of those is quite aware of what goes down. Maybe another one of the Mourners Guild is appalled. Where have these clothes gone? We've got an investigation to potentially plumb, and that eventually leads you all the way down to the south of the city, where there is a seamstress making knockoff clothes on the cheap, taking in other people's and ex-clothing and repurposing it, so to speak. I think there could be quite a lot in that. Potentially a really good story. Add a little extra couple of zings, and that'll, I think, make for a really good adventure hook, both for connecting the seamstress through to the rest of the city, but also for making the Mourners Guild a little bit more cartful than just the random set of mourners that are often solemnly presented in their various write-ups, somewhat too respectfully sometimes. So it might be nice to mix up those stereotypes a little bit, having ourselves our dodgy mourners selling off goods to another one. So if you're still there, Janice, that was an absolute delight to have your extra contributions. Really made a big difference. Thank you so much. Looking forward to hopefully seeing more in the future. And thanks also, Executor, for that little extra. I think that has made what was already a good idea just that little bitty better. Okay, so we are nearing the end of building out all of the necessary drawing for this section. We have a few locations already marked. If there's anything you feel should also be added in here, now is the time to bring it up, because I'm going to be bringing this section to an end very soon in terms of the core drawing. So if you've got anything you think you'd like to see here, or have an idea has just struck you like a bolt from the celestial blue, then do drop it in as a comment, and I will pick that up and we'll potentially add that in. Let's just pop in this body of sunken water. That there, 2 more buildings at the front here, and we are almost done this section. Yes, we are. Look at that. We are going through this like a speeding train, making good progress. Okay. Core drawing now in place. Pretty much. I will I'll connect that with the road actually. I will check the comments once I'm happy with these last little details. And if there's nothing going, I'll start the colouring in of this section so that we've got this all done. And then pause again, check the comments. And then move into the highlights and the shades, which will finish off this part. Just before I do that, though, I'm just going to sort the water for our connecting walkways there. Make sure they're all right. Yes, they are. That's all good. Photoshop appears to have just paused on me. Let me just put that away and bring it back up again. It's not drawing anymore, so I'm going to quickly save that and look at the comments while I resolve that. Let's make my face all big while I check the last few comments. Okay, let's... Photoshop's being a bit troublesome this evening for me. Right, let's see what we've got here. Right, Janice then adds, that Mourners Guild link is hilarious, horrifyingly so. Yeah, I quite like it. Just the idea of them being in the at the funeral, and then tipping over, and then the naked body coming out, and the shock and the horror from the mourning relatives as they look down at their beloved person now in the dirt at the bottom of this grave. And everyone going, where's all the stuff that we did leaving him? He was wearing it not more than 2 hours ago when we all saw him at the open casket. What the? Yeah, it makes for a really fun story. I really quite like that. Yalab then adds, sorry, I've been in and out the stream tonight. A bit more of a hectic evening than I expected. It happens, Yalab. Don't worry about it. I don't expect everyone to watch the entire thing. Indeed, the vast majority of people sort of slide in and slide out and then watch it later at their own leisure. And I think that's part of the fun of the stream, that you can do that with ease. Then adds, but from what I've heard, you've all been doing just fine. Yeah, I think we've been doing just fine as well. Yeah, this one's this area, in fact, in general, is turning out really nicely. I've just reopened it. I'm just about to head in towards the colouring of it. Let's just bring it up on the screen while we're doing that. Share my screen window, open up the Kalegen window like so, and bring it on screen. So yeah, I'm quite liking how this is going. I particularly like how this place feels like it was an established built section of town, and it's sort of just collapsed into the water. You can sort of see how it's happened. It's coming on quite nicely. Esty then adds, you have presumably run the Enemy Within several times. I have run it, started at about 27. That's a number I've made up. I don't actually know how many times I've done it, but I'm going to say about 27 times. It's a lot over the number of years. I've just reached Power Behind the Throne for the first time. It's a fun one. Do you have any tips to help remember the huge caps of NPCs know and think about each other? I'm not going to go in depth because this is a mapping stream, and possibly when we reach these sections at a later date, we'll want to sit down and have, say, a campfire chat about how we've run the Enemy Within at various points and how massively different what we present is from the core books, because we're making it our own this time, you know, as we all do as GMs. We all make it our own. The Enemy Within, the Power Behind the Throne, pardon me, I've always thought that it was one of the more genius sections of the Enemy Within campaign as a whole. I thought it was really differently put together as a campaign. And I remember discussing it with Graham Davis when we were organizing what was, at that point when we were discussing it, a slightly different titled version of the Enemy Within. Good conversations. We were discussing different ways we could present it. And Graham, he always found this section quite difficult because when it was first turned in, it was a gobbledygook of different adventuring material. With a genius idea behind it, they had to cobble together during editing, because the original author had done quite a unique way of presenting it. And what they brought together, which was the first edition version of it, is, I think, quite playable and really quite good. Now, on that, there is a large number of NPCs, and I would generally suggest, having run it multiple times, that the easiest way to do it is to first, and most obviously, read through it multiple times. Get to know the PCs and the NPCs. You're going to know quite quickly what you're going to need to know for the next session. So the next session might be, we're off to see this NPC, and you know what that NPC is going to say about the questions that the NPCs are going to throw at them. That makes it very easy to think ahead of where you're going. So you rarely need to go more than 2 or 3 NPCs deep for 1 or 2 sessions to go in. Now, if you're mad like me I'm going to be running through the Power Behind the Throne section at a lightning speed. I'm really keen to get on to the next section. My plan for it has vacillated between 4 or 5 episodes up to about 6 or 8 episodes, depending on my own preference at the time. But that relies upon knowing all of them really very well. But most importantly as well, knowing the PCs really well and knowing the direction that they are most likely to go in, which makes it really easy for me to prepare just the material that they need. And I think ultimately that's what I found to be the easiest way to prepare for this part of the adventure is not prepare it all, because preparing it all is a lot of work on your old noggin. And you're going to find it difficult to keep track of it all. There's nothing wrong with keeping a spreadsheet, for example, with each of the NPCs and what the rating of those NPCs are in terms of their overall opinion of the PCs. And ticking it up or down according to the PC's actions. That's a good idea. You can run that in the background with ease. But remembering the in-depth nature of every single NPC might be too much for many people. That being the case, just get the bits you need prepared, and you'll find that it flows quite easily. And if the PCs decide that they're going to go and speak to someone that you've not fully prepared, there are 1,000 things that you can pre-prepare to throw in the PCs as they make their way from A to B, which will take you to the end of the session. And then at the start of the next session, you've completely prepared not just that bit, but also the most likely branches that the PCs will go down next time. So loosely, prepare the NPCs you need, rarely more than 2 or 3. Have yourself some random occurrences that can be dropped in the PCs should they go in a different direction. Festival antics, or some NPC approaches them and asks them to do something. Anything that will take them away for that extra hour while you can then go and prep for the other parts. And that's not a bad way to do it. It's not necessarily the best way, but it's not a bad way. My way is slightly different, and I will conclude with my way, which is read it all. Think of them as a bunch of real people, get them all in my head, read it all again, decide who they all are, then wing it. Wing it. Alan, it's had to log off for a bit, but I have returned. Delighted to see you back, and don't worry about logging off. If I could do so, I probably would, but I can't. Alexander there then drops in to say, I have to step out for the evening, sniff and cry. Enjoy the rest of the stream. I certainly will. And thank you for the mapping and the insights. And hopefully you can watch it at a later date anytime you wish, Alexander. Right. So I think we've done enough chat there, including some slightly off Kalegen chat. So let's dive into the coloring of these locations. Okay. Photoshop has stalled on me again. Oh, it's just caught up. Okay. Are you working? Please don't be horrible. Yes, you are. Excellent. Having some definite Photoshop issues this evening. Do I have multiple windows open that I don't see in the background? No, not really. I've got Excel running. That's never a problem. Normally. Who knows? Right. Let's quickly get into the colors. So first, location colors. So this is the colors for the special locations. We've got ourselves a large fighting pit location, which we're going to mark in here. That's number 1. I'm using a tiny brush. I could really do with a bigger one. Let me just quickly change the size of that. And that goes up into our little cruisy nesty type place up there. You can see right down into the depths of the lower water pit down there as well. We have got ourselves our seamstress who is working from here. And she lives in the cottage at the back, I think, which is where she does a lot of her criminal business. Let's connect the two of those with a simple road so that we can see that those two locations are 100% linked. So let's put that there. Go into the road layer, road, and connect them at the back like so, and then just drop on a quick bit of drawing around that to pop that into the place. I'm on the wrong layer. Lines. There we go. So they are definitely linked there. Lovely. We also want to have somewhere for our curiosity shop that's sunk right in. So I'm going to drop that into this location as well. That's the one that was mentioned by Martin Ironwick over in the Discord channel. If you check over in the Discord channel, that topic is hopefully open up over there in Kalegen. So I'm going to drop that one over here. This one is lower level sunk. So if you're watching this later, Martin, whether it's at double speed, when you or whatever equivalent, you'll be able to locate that location here. Lovely. Now, if you're the sort of person that likes the idea of writing stuff up, we're gearing up to starting all of the writing very soon. If you'd like to be involved, drop into Discord and feel free to just start writing up any sections you see for the many locations that have already been listed there. If, by comparison, you'd like to, seriously do like 20, 30, 40 of these write-ups, I think I could do this. This sounds like a lot of fun. I'm well up for writing some crazy locations. We're also taking on applications for people to actually write directly into World Anvil and translate everything over from Discord into World Anvil and start creating new stuff into the World Anvil version of this city and indeed the enemy within its whole. If you'd like to join us as part of our writing team over on World Anvil, feel free to send me a message over in Discord. Our World Anvil team's sitting at about 5 people, I think. And we're gearing up towards starting all the write-ups for those. Do feel free to send us a message and ping if you wish to do so. Also, while I'm on that, as I start coloring in here, I should probably do all of the normal YouTubey things. So if you enjoy our streams, do please remember to follow the channel and do all those other things that people always say. Smash that bell, ring it so you get notifications, press like on the video. Seriously though, if you could like the video, it takes almost no time on your side, but it makes quite a difference for us hitting various YouTube algorithmy things. And we all want those, right? I mean, that sounds like something I want to have. So feel free to do that. That would be greatly appreciated. So like the video, please do follow the channel. And as an extra little thing, if you are enjoying it and you've got any Warhammer pals or mapping pals who you think might be interested in watching our streams, why am I doing this with such a tiny brush? I have literally no idea. Then please do share it with them, or take some of the posts that we post on either Twitter or YouTube or whatever, and please share that with whomever you think might be interested in it. The more people that we get coming in, the better. Equally, if you know anyone that's interested in actual plays, we are standing on the precipice of pulling the trigger on that. We'll find out how close to the precipice tomorrow when we do another test stream. I was setting up cameras for that today, and one of them was still proving deeply problematic and not doing what I was telling it to. But all the sound system was working. Just got a new mic added to that, actually. So that was nice. Lindsay managed to catch a new mic in a sale for about 350 quid, which doesn't sound like a sale to me, but it was significantly cheaper than the price that it was originally asked for, because the local music shop was shutting down, which is a sad time for people who use it, like us, because both my kids were at music school. My eldest is now at university, though, studying game design and production, perhaps unsurprisingly. But my youngest is still at music school in high school, and we are in the music shop quite a bit. It's sad to see it shut, but it does mean we've got a cheap mic, so I'm not that sad. Less sad than I could be, perhaps. Let's separate that out. Okay, our coloring's almost done. When I'm done the coloring, I'll pop into the comments one last time before doing highlights and shades. And that'll be our last opportunity to add anything extra to this part of town. So even if you know nothing about the Warhammer world and you're looking on this going, I think I could add something, feel free to drop it in. If it doesn't quite fit the Warhammer world, I'll make it fit. We can talk it out and turn it into something that's super cool and fitting for this location. We already have 3 purple spots in this area, so we don't need a new special location per se. But that doesn't mean that we don't not need one. So if you do have a cool idea for something that could fit in here, I am well up for it. I'm going to quickly, before I pass over to that, just add in the bit of water inside that pool there. Is there anywhere else I need to add water to? No, that looks good. I think we've got all our colours in place. We do. Right, let's go check the comments, see if there's anything else there. Right, SD adds in, just know all the characters really well. Yeah, I know. It's really, really helpful advice, isn't it? Tell me about it, Yala. It feels like being on the precipice for weeks now. It feels like it to us as well. Last week it was really disappointing. We set up all the cameras. We know that we've got until next week before one of our players who's currently in Japan comes back. So we were hoping we'd have everything down pat and perfect for last week. And then I set it all up, and the film stalled and was freezing randomly. So we didn't even record last week. So we ended up just doing another combat battle map prep for our session last Friday. And I was deeply disappointed. So I'm hoping that tomorrow we'll get ourselves a full, at least 3.5, 4 hour recording out of it. And if that's worked, that's not going out to patrons, that's not going out to anyone, that's just for us to look at and cry over either quality issues or our own faces being on screen and how much we dislike hearing our own voices. You know how it is. But if that all works, that means we record our pre-stream the week after when Sage is back. She's back from Japan, not this Friday, the Friday after. And if that all goes well, I mean, heck, we're good enough to really go. All that is then is building up the pre-stream release and then turning it into a release and going. And I think we'll probably just drop and start and just get streaming and get it out there, because there's no need for us to do a big build-up. We're not going to get billions watching us. We're just going to get a few come in because of Warhammer reasons. So we're just going to dive straight in and enjoy ourselves. All of our rules are pretty much in place, except for I've got a couple of magic-y ones that I'm going to play around with. So there's nothing stopping us on the rules side. It's just the technical setup. So yeah, it does feel a little bit like it's been weeks for us, but we're almost there. Alan adds, a small gang of kids called the Water Rats would be good round here. Yeah, we got a gang of kids further up, but I think another gang, they might not necessarily need to be kids. Perhaps we're moving up to youths. So rather than dealing with our younger kids, that we've got an orphan-y type gang that's connected to the Skaven. To the what? To the Skaven. Further up in the slum area, we could have ourselves a proper knife gang of horrible kids, possibly a few of them working around here. Perhaps the entry is more, there's 4 or 5 gangs around here, all of whom are wrestling for dominance. They're disenfranchised youths. They've got nothing better to do. They have no industry they can easily move into. They have no jobs that they can fill the shoes of from their parents. So they've turned to crime out of boredom. The local priest of Sigmar is trying to tie them together. There's lots of ways that we could potentially bring that together, but I think that having some sort of criminals in the area is a good idea. You want children's back to back? I agree with that, Yalab. We don't want them back to back per se, but if we up it from the word kids to youths, or older teenagers, people in their early 20s, being the old men of the crew, that I think could work really well and speak to the nature of how this community has grown up. So in the last 50 years, it's gone from a hopeful area where the buildings were relatively decent quality, if not high quality, to high quality over in the eastern side. And they have depressed over time. And as the new generation came in into a broken, horrible location, they've had nowhere to go. So they've turned to their own devices and stabbings and criminal activity and similar. 2 rival gangs of kids. Again, I think possibly multiples. Maybe one gang runs through the water on stilts. Can't go wrong with stilt walkers. I'm getting images of bad Daredevil cartoons now. Stiltman was in that, wasn't he? Pretty sure he was. It's been ages since I read Daredevil. I haven't read him since I was a kid. It was him and not Spider-Man, or did Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends also have that? Not Amazing Friends, that was cartoon. Spectacular. I can't recall. Regardless, Stiltman makes me laugh. Alan then adds, I see a Romeo and Juliet West Side Story Party in my mind's eye. I think I always see one of those in my mind's eye, and I think we could definitely incorporate that down. Whether we want to add a location for that, I'm not so sure. I think that the area itself could benefit from that. So if anyone's coming in afterwards and writing up notes about this location, I would suggest that the overall district notes, so to speak to the local gangs, and perhaps there's a Romeo and Juliet style adventure hook interlaced with that. But again, we'll want to undermine it. You won't want it to be the same old story playing out again in the same way with, I don't know, Roma Lich and I don't know, Juliana or some nonsense like that. We'd want to tell a different story, and one that perhaps uses people's expectations against them. Right. So anyway, I think it's fair to say that we've got nothing else location-wise necessarily to add here. So I'm just going to go straight into the highlights and shades to get this section into place. I think we're making relatively good time. We're just past 9 o'clock. I think these are a lot lower than they might initially appear in terms of their overall size. Just past 9 o'clock, and we are 2/3 of our way through the drawing here. and I wanted to have this section done today. We will get this section done today. It's happening. That's good. Love it. So let's get these sections popped into place. Yep, loving this. I do quite enjoy doing this, the highlights and the shades, not because it's a part of drawing I like, really, and not because it's really easy, because it really is easy. I purposely don't do it in a very complicated way, not just because I like things being easy on myself, but because, as we mentioned on multiple occasions in the previous streams, these locations are super, super, super small. So there's almost no point in doing them any more detailed. You do it detailed enough so that you get the idea of the highlights and the shades, and then you move on. But I like it because once it's done and you zoom out, it really does make the area pop and stand out. It gives so much depth to what could otherwise be a relatively flat appearing area. And I just like the impact that what is a relatively simple process has on the maps as a whole. Okay, we are definitely getting somewhere now. Almost done the basic shades. Hopefully not missed any, as I am wont to do sometimes. Oh, yes, we have missed one, right? So that's a pit. That's open to the outside. So let's pop that there. That's deep into pit. Okay. Any other ones that we need to go on the edge there? Yeah, I'll probably do. I'm going to do the highlights as well before I check the comments. Then we'll check the comments. I'll do a little bit of after drawing just in case I need it. And then we'll be straight into the last section. Of this part of the city that we're doing today. I think for next time, what I'll do is I'll pop up a poll as to which section of the city everyone wants to move to next. Pop that up for the patrons. If you happen to be one of those patrons, you can do a quick vote on what you want to see me cover next as we start making our way through another part of the city. As I recall, it's possible I won't be here next Thursday because I might be down in London doing London things. I've got some people I need to go meet down there. So I'll know that for certain probably by, I'm guessing I'll know that for certain. How did I miss the shadow completely on this side? I'll know that for certain by about Saturday. So I will give a ping out on Saturday as to whether I'm going to be doing the next one next Thursday or 1 week after that and the Thursday after that. I don't like skipping one unless I have to, but I kind of have to do this. The joys of being a grown-up. All right, there we go. Back to my highlights. I was just finishing off those. Okay. I think we're almost there. Let's quickly add in a couple of loose bits for the water to give the idea of the rippling effect moving through it. Again, this is just super simple little drifty lines. Nothing complicated about this at all. Just to give the impression of the water pooling around different things. Okay, cool. I'm also going to add a little bit of black lining to support that. Or white lining, as it turns out. There we go, a little bit of white lining. And black lining, there we go. Yeah, this place is beginning to look proper flooded. Yeah. Yeah, I'm liking how this is all pulling together as a location. I can almost feel it. I can't remember where we got the idea to sink the entire place down here, but whoever's idea it was, I'm going to claim it was mine. Whoever's idea it was a really good idea. It's really added a good chunk of character to this part of town. I really rather like it. Let's zoom out and just take a look at that. Oh, there's a couple of shadows I've missed. I'm going to quickly pop them in before I get to the comments. Okay, so we're about to move to the last section that we're doing in this part of the stream. If you've got ideas for that, now's the time to bring them up into the comments. We will have a Mercy House here, which was going to be a large I can't even say philanthropic. I've been streaming for too long. Location run by the Shallians. We discussed that earlier in the stream. If you want to go check that out, rewind the stream and do so. There's a couple of highlights I should put on that too. Do that now, because I've completely missed all the highlights over here. So if you've got anything that you'd like to see in that part of town, now's the time to bring it up. We have only got one location there so far. I don't think we've got any others, unless I've forgotten one. If I have, please tell me, and I'll make sure that I draw that in. Oh, yeah. This place is pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah, I like this place. This place is cool. Yeah. Okay, we're on to our last section. So I'm going to quickly zoom out, just have a little look at how that's built up. Yeah, that looks like it's proper sunk down in there, doesn't it? You can get the whole feel of how it's sunk down to place. I'm going to add a little bit of extra shade there to give the idea of the land lowering slightly about there. I'm going to drop that down a percentage. Yeah, just to give that impression that the land is sinking in that direction. Yeah, that works. Yeah. Okay, cool. I am done with that. Let's go take a look at the comments and see if there's anything else to bring up before I go and check this last section. All right. Okay, where were we? Do we have, asked Alan Stainer, anyone conveniently selling poisons in the city yet? We have an apothecary. So maybe. Yellowbad, screw that, let's go full Riverdale. Instead of Romeo and Juliet, I presume, carrying on the earlier conversation. Riverdale. I say that. I've watched it. I don't think we have an explicit poison seller so far, but perhaps a couple of implied ones. I think that's the case. We don't have anyone who's specifically doing it, and indeed, this would be a good place to potentially have someone doing it. You've got the potential for extracting venom from various snakes, other water-dwelling beasties, perhaps our fen worm. There's a lot of potential opportunity there for this. So if you think we should have one here, feel free to start building up a good story for not so much an apothecary per se, but someone who's dealing with poisons. Perhaps it's an individual. Perhaps it's not so much that they're running a poison shop. It's just someone that everyone turns to when they want a particular thing. If so, why has this person got the knowledge about poisons? Where have they come from? Are they an ex something else who has fallen on bad times? Did they learn it from one of their parents? There's definitely something that we could run with that. Someone has to supply the rat catchers. Indeed, the rat catchers often supply themselves in that they secure all of their stuff as required. But if you can get it cheaply from someone else, why bother securing it yourself? Yeah, then adds they could probably brew their own. No, yes, I think they probably could. I don't think selling poisons is legal in the Reikland. I don't think selling poisons is illegal either. It's one of those gray areas. There's all manner of goodies that are poisonous that are not illegal per se. They're just things that people have figured out how to use. It's illegal to poison people and actually murder them, but it's certainly not illegal to sell poisons. I mean, it could be something else. I don't think it's quite that well regulated in terms of how it expresses itself outside of maybe Nuln, where I can imagine there's laws for it. Talipine is the city of laws. It's got more laws than any other city in the empire, so you could argue Talipine might. Altdorf probably doesn't, or it's got some local bylaws that concern certain individual substances, but I can't see it being a blanket. You can't sell poison. I don't even think that's a thing. There's too many people that use poison as part of their standard jobs. Yeah. Anyways, Executor then adds, maybe our lovers are from opposing gangs, but instead of tragic romantics, they are a psycho Bonnie and Clyde. Maybe they could be Cainites. Rather than necessarily leading into the religious point, if there were Cainites, they would need exposure to Cain. And that would involve either someone passing over that information or an artifact whispering to them in the night as to a particular thing. But I quite like the idea of their families not agreeing with their thing. So rather than doing the normal, bringing the households together, or the households mourn what happens. They're now going against their own household, their own households, their own gangs, and they're responsible for the gang war, not the other way around. The gang wars are being put in place because of them and their own difficulties with it. You could probably build a story out of that somewhere. Is legality a problem? There is no police, indeed. Until someone poisons a noble, it's not like the army's going to care. And I think that's pretty much exactly what the case is going to be. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not laws in place. And I think that's something that just because there's no police doesn't mean there's no law. There's no specific police, but if you break the law and you're brought forth before a judge and everyone says this person broke the law, the judge will say, you've broken this law, you're getting hung, or you're getting your fingers cut off, or you're getting your hand cut off, or you're going to have to go and work in this labor camp for the next 5 years of your life, or whatever it is that is an appropriate judgment in the local area. What you have to remember with the Reikland, though, is that it's almost federal, in that the Prince of Reikland rules over, supposedly, all of the prime estates in the Reikland. That's the Reikland estates, as it's called there. And each one of those Reikland estates is effectively almost a sovereign power in its own right. It can do pretty much whatever it wants, the Duke or the Baron or whomever it is that's there, as long as they do whatever it is that their individual land is required to do on behalf of the Prince of Altdorf. And normally that's not more than summoning troops at particular times of war, doing particular things. The Prince of Reikland isn't even in a position where he's allowed to judge any of these nobles in court. If they break the law, there's nothing the prince can do about it. There's only one person, the High Constable, who's capable of doing that. He's appointed by the Prince of Reikland, and that's important. But even then, if you read the little write-up about him, he hasn't actually used his power for ages, because nobody really tells top tier nobles what to do, and they have almost absolute freedom to do whatever they want within their individual territories. There are, however, laws for all of the Reikland, and they can be brought to bear. The cult of Rena is constantly trying to break through to individual lords and chip away at their power so that more, let's say, free version of the law can be applied, rather than one that's only applied at the behest of a lord or a lady who really doesn't care about the law, only cares about their own individual circumstances. So it's a big mess, is the best way of viewing it. Don't try to view this as a nice, clear society where there's things that are legal and things that aren't legal, and that's what everything's going to be judged on. You've got individual judge biases, individual noble biases, the fact that nobody can really tell anybody else what to do under certain circumstances. Jurisdictions don't really exist per se. Often the rule of the mob wins the day on a particular day. A noble might just go with the mob just because he doesn't want all those people rebelling against him. There's all manner of different issues that cause problems, including, are poisons illegal? I imagine in some places they are and some they aren't. And I wouldn't be happy making a blanket statement for all of the empire having an individual law. Indeed, all of the Reikland, or even possibly even all of the Princedom of Altdorf. The Principality of Altdorf is a large place that is split up into a patchwork of smaller lands, all of which are ruled over by other nobles, all of which have got their own individual versions of how the law should be represented in their land. So it's complicated. Alan says, as well as rat catchers, the nobles will probably be their biggest clients. Yeah, probably. But again, through somebody who secures it on their behalf. Yalb then says, I don't recall whose idea it was, but I think the area ended up being much more flooded than I initially expected. Yeah, I didn't expect it to go quite this far either, but I really quite like where it's landed. Yalb then also adds, what's up with the marina cut out of the canal right there? Yes. I think I missed when it was added. Is that supposed to be, I think, specific? Yes, that was the original barge building area. And it began to sink, the walls began to break, and they moved that up to the main barge building area we have at the front. I'm not sure what we're going to do with it yet, and I think that's something that we're going to have to loosely discuss, because we have ourselves an area here that requires justification for why it even exists, and possibly we should build over it a little bit, as it's cracked and sunk, and possibly even the water for the canal has begun to leak into these individual areas too. Blue has popped in. Hello, Blue. Good to see you. Glad to catch one of these live. Big fan. Oh, thank you so much for saying so, Blue. You put a happy smile on my face. Oh, thanks, Blue. If you have any ideas for this last section we're about to do, Blue, then please do drop them in. I'll give a quick description before I start, I don't know, drawing some nonsense into this area. What we have is the last corner of our sunken part of the town, the slums. This is a bad part of town. And we have a Mercy House that was originally going to be run by the Shallians that has sunk almost entirely. Probably isn't a Mercy House anymore, but they probably want to reclaim it because it's theirs. We have ourselves some other locations north and south of that Mercy House that we're going to have to decide what to do with. At the moment, they're just going to be filled in as random buildings. We have one feature tower down here, which might be worth discussing. Why is this tower important? What should we do for this particular tower to say this is one that we've marked out as a specific location on the map, and we're going to detail? There's quite a few different things that we could pop in here. If you've got an idea for anything you'd like to see on the map, add it on, because one of the joys of coming into the stream live is you can influence what's on the map, which is half the fun of it as far as I'm concerned. And before I start drawing in there, pop your ideas in now, because I will start drawing. I'll catch the Kalegen from SD. The poison peddler could be a witch. Oh, those witches. Hiding out in the slum, maybe. Perhaps people who are really desperate to get good deals, but they have to pay in other ways. Blood or hair. And is collecting a variety of dodgy things from various nobles and visiting dignitaries that could be used as curses against them. Perhaps even with the knowledge of someone in power. I quite like that as an idea. I like it as an idea for a couple of reasons. Number one, it gives a justification for why this witch is living down here and why he or she has not chosen to go elsewhere. As a witch, could not be more legal if they tried. We can have someone who's most definitely outside the college system and possibly outside the nicer witches groups as well. As in, this is somebody who is self-taught, and is probably a danger to those who are around them, and maybe also be responsible for the attraction of some of the nastier elements that have come to this part of town purely because the accidental small trace amounts of dar that they're releasing into the local environment, dar being black magic, for those of you who don't know, it's the dark, horrible, oily, sticky stuff that looks somewhat like venom from the movies. For those who have got the sight, those who've got witch sight can see all the magic in the world of Warhammer. And this dar is creeping out of this witch. He leaves puddles of it wherever he goes. Very small, mostly indetectable. Even if you're a witch, you might miss it, particularly given that they will dissolve into the local environment and slowly but surely make it worse, undermining everything around them because it's the source of corruption. And that's not just mental corruption or spiritual corruption. It's not just that someone will start to turn dark, which they will because of dar, but it's also a quite physical one. It erodes at the corners of reality and it starts to break everything down wherever it goes. And I quite like the idea of ourselves having a relatively dark witch, possibly in the employ of some noble or another, who has got nowhere else to go, perhaps doesn't want to just flee into the wilds because it's really freaking dangerous, and has set up shop down here. I think that's a good idea. Nice one. Love it, SD. That could very nicely tie to our poisoner. Good call too. Quite like that story. If anyone's got anything to add to that or to embellish or perhaps suggest changes, do drop it in as a comment. Executor then adds an idea for the old barge builder's dock. Perhaps it's barge breakers now. You know, that's not a bad idea. Although the area is relatively new. What would they be doing with it and why? What are they dropping into there and why? It's still... I'm imagining this wall here is not in good nick. It's the old stone edging of the canals, and it has literally collapsed and fallen on the other side. It used to be where the ground level was, and it's subsided and been reshored up several times here. Same on this side here with water down on the other side. But we've got ourselves a relatively firm part up at the north. How's that jetty being used? What exactly are they using it for? They're doing barge breaking. Why is it like old barges that are passing out? Why are they not selling those on before they reach that point further down the river or out? Is it because the watches that they're taking down are relatively dangerous and they have some issues, so they're needing to repurpose it and take those parts that they've broken and move them over into the main area? What's the story here, I think, is the question. Right, so we've had so far 2 core ideas to go into this section. Idea number 1 is a witch stroke poisoner who's perhaps working for a top tier noble. The exact noble can be covered later. And we've got ourselves our large mercy house, which will take up all of this location and has sunk right down, perhaps with one part sinking far more than another part. If you've got any other ideas for a third location, do bring it up. I don't think we need one though, because we have this tower. I would really do, if anyone's got an idea for how we could use that tower, if anyone's got anything to add to that, we could really do with an idea for that. But whilst we wait for that potential, I'm going to start building in what we definitely have. So we'll start with this Mercy House, which I'm going to presume was actually initially commissioned in an almost classical style. Classical style in Warhammer denotes a lot of the older religions that came from the south of the empire, and they're often given frontages that look somewhat Grecian. It's quite similar to how in many parts of the real world, old civic offices are often given that Grecian look with their fluted pillars. And that also seeps over into America as well, where a lot of the civic buildings can sometimes take on that almost classical look. That classical look in the Warhammer world is often attributed to Verena or Shalia or to Myrmidia or to any who are trying to reflect those old classical stylings of religions that come from the south. So I imagine it was probably a classical building. I imagine it was initially a big block. So let's put our block in place and imagine how that... The main building itself will have been a block, almost like a temple. So a temple stroke Mercy House. It will have had steps leading up to it. These steps are almost certainly underwater and well out of sight now. We'll have had collars and pillars. Let's have one of the columns having fallen down. So there would have originally been, let's say, 4 too big and 2 small, leading into the main central building, which turns much more empire when you move into this area. This area would have had a roof over it. So let's have this column fall down in this direction. Jagged edge and connecting those 2 parts. Steps leading up. All this part is now underwater, but parts of it can still be seen in places. The stairs are going to be sort of underwater too. So let's just hint at them. As the water goes round that. So this part can still have its initial roofing in place. So we'll just get the shape like so, and a couple of statues that still lean out over the waters that stand there. We've got our main roofing which goes across the top. Lower levels have sunk entirely. There used to be cellars and everything underneath. There was housing. There was a small hospice. Other bits added for Shalia to do her work. All now flooded. And Shalia, or at least the cult locally, wants this place reclaimed in their name. But it is most certainly not currently under their control. Question is, whose control is it under and what is happening here? I think that makes for an interesting potential story for how this location may now be being used. If you have any ideas for that, let's bring them up. Let's also pop down here and we'll do the same as we did last time, and we'll block out. Oh, I've got a blue line there. I'll block out where the buildings probably loosely were. And then we'll do an updated version of those. This was a relatively good part of town, so I'm actually thinking that this building here was all that was there, and we had ourselves a back area that led to the road that went at the back, which is now flooded. So all this area here might actually be flooded. It was originally with bits of fence and walls sticking out of it. A main building there, possibly something civic based given where we are. We'd have moved into a bunch of buildings that were right up against here and have now collapsed, I think. So there'll be bits of roofing and similar showing here, but these have collapsed almost entirely. It's all sunk down here. I think bits of ruin. I think most of this section is actually probably just a bit of a mess. Old buildings that have collapsed into water. There originally would have been a bunch of warehouses, of which there's a few frontages left and very little else left here as it just collapses into the back. I can hear in the background Lindsay has returned home from her EIDO. She's currently whispering away in the background to my daughter. I hope she had a good time swishing her sword around. Yeah, okay, I can see this all being a bit collapsed and broken. Okay, so I've got a loose idea of what I think this place should be. I'll check the comments, see if there's been any alternatives for how this could express. And if there hasn't, I'll just fill in these boxes as they are. If there has, I will change my boxes and turn them into something else. But I think this sort of does, just as a general idea. Yeah, okay, let's take a quick look at what the comments are. We have, oh, I left a comment up from last time. Yeah, the old barge building basin could be filled with cages, farming some water animals. I like that. For food, aforementioned oysters, or just on a large scale, or something else like crayfish. I like that a lot. Maybe a freshwater crayfish. One of the great joys of the warmer world is that you can take anything from the real world and amp it up at least 10 times. So you don't just have a rat, as we mentioned earlier in the stream. We have a giant rat. We don't just have a spider. We have a giant spider. We don't just have a crayfish. We have a giant water insect from hell. And yeah, we could have ourselves a bunch of cages that are working from this area, possibly a long warehouse attached to there. And this place is just filled with cages of various kinds that are holding freshwater equivalent of crayfish. We can possibly name them later. There's a walkway put in place across this side attached to the old wall, which is constantly crumbling. Walkway here as well, attached to yet more cages that are making their way along here. Possibly a couple of nets are cast out into the middle. Maybe some buoys holding up, maybe some creels where they're catching some smaller ones as well. I think that's a pretty good idea. I quite like the idea of some sort of big bug-eyed crayfish thing that's really quite large. And possibly the chap who's running this place has got himself a pet one that, for reasons best left to not thinking about too hard, can come out on dry land and can be seen shuffling around by his feet. His own pet crayfish thing, which will probably look disgusting. Quite like that idea. Okay, Yal then adds, or just a fishery, I guess, with a net stopping the fish from escaping into the canal. I think I actually quite like the idea of our caged crayfish and everything. I think that has a lot of character. Perhaps a bog octopus resides in the pool and amongst the rubble. I think maybe a bog octopus somewhere around here is not a bad idea, or maybe a young one that's crept in and the PCs might end up having to deal with. I think there's a lot of potential for that. I do like the bog octopus as a creature, as you may know from my great love of the Bog King from the starter set. Turning the temple ruin into something antithetical to the goddess could be an interesting direction. I agree. I'm not keen to make it Nurgle, though, which is the obvious antithetical. So perhaps making something that is more violent, which stands against the pacifism of Shalia. Giant water insect from hell, so just shrimp. Yeah, pretty much. We all know that they are the fucking worst. Yalab then adds, I'm pretty sure crayfish are freshwater by default. Yes, I'm pretty sure they are as well. I'm just making sure that I didn't get the wrong terminology, because whenever you're unsure, never a good idea. Yep, I was thinking of a young one. Yeah, me too. I think that works quite neatly and possibly can be dropped in for one of our pools or something similar else where around this area. Okay, so let me just add in a little bit more detail on these to make sure we've got it. Imagining these as almost like 3 separate huts that have been pulled together. With a gate holding no, they won't put the gate there because they'll want to hold off the section that they control. So we can do it like so with a small guardhouse there. Imagine there'll be someone on patrol working their way over. That leads out into, whoa, accidentally changed my brush there again. Get back to that brush. Okay, I'm getting pissed. Oh, nice. Lindsay just coming in wearing a nice new dress. I have no idea where that came from.
My friend gave it to me.
And say thanks to your friend for an awesome dress.
Look,
Oh, it's got petticoats and everything.
I'm going to show everyone my dress.
You're going to show everyone your dress. They're going to see you tiny. And then you are just in the corner. Now let me just... Sorry, this is going to be your favourite part of the town, Lindsay.
Oh, my.
Crayfish.
Gross. Why would you do that?
For, you know, the monies and the foods.
Hi, Jaleb. Oh, I thank you very much.
What did Jaleb say?
He said it was a great dress.
Let me just go a quick cheers. Yeah, lads, I'm not strongly against octopus, but it feels like we're just aping the Bog King. Maybe there's a different water thing we could use. We wouldn't be aping the Bog King. The Bog King is so bloody unique that it's very hard to ape unless you go for another gigantic bog octopus. Oh, yes. Oh, you're a dick.
It does not have pockets, and that is a disappointment, especially because it's got a seam where, like, it feels like it definitely should have pockets. But I think you could quite easily turn it into a dress with pockets.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly bring up this comment so we can see it. Yal didn't say hi, Lindsay, and great dress. I'm requested to know, did it have pockets?
I just answered.
And he goes, "Yep, that's it. That's the octopus."
It's a Slanesh octopus.
Ship it. SD then adds, since the pits are across the street, maybe the Mercy House now serves as either a housing for the fighters or even the place where gangs use to train their fighters. I like that. I think actually as a training location for it works really nicely. Because it's being used for violence. Plus, we also have money attached to it, which means it's going to be difficult for someone to oust them and for the Shallians to reclaim what is, as far as they're concerned, their territory. That seems pretty cool. And that octopus doesn't even need art, says Yalab. Just take a pic of that thing. I think the word thing is accurate. Oh, I love it. Okay, so we've got ourselves a fair bit of lining done there. We've got ourselves our pens, which I really like. That was a good idea. I'm now just going to finish off the little watery bits, finish off my lining. When I've done that, I'm going to take one last check at the comments before I start the colouring in, just in case there's been any new ideas added for what we could do around this area. If there's not, I'm then going to go straight into the highlights and the shades, and we will be done this section of town. We can pat ourselves on the back and generally be pretty goddamn happy with ourselves. So I'll just quickly sort the rest of these lines. I'll give the idea of this part hasn't completely sunk as we're getting closer to the wall and the ground goes downwards towards... Oh, I'm drawing this section here. It's a crime! Let me just quickly fill in the section. Forgot the section at the bottom. Okay, I remember this house. This was going to be one of the better houses. Put that in. Another nice, probably a municipal building. So let's drop it with the idea that there was something built into the front, perhaps some sort of frieze. The larger chimneys at the back of it. The water is still grounded in this area by the walls. It hasn't completely sunk here. Yeah, okay, that works. Just quickly edge all of this. So again, I'm really quite pleased with where this part of the town is landing. It's got character. There's a lot of potential for adventure in this area. Adventure hooks almost write themselves for how this place could manifest and be used. Plus, we've got really quite a nice house down here, possibly even with a bit of land at the back of it that could be used by a well-to-do NPC. Doesn't require us to write it up because that can just be left to GM to decide who they want to put there. Perhaps it's the pit boss from the pit fighting school, or perhaps it's some sort of other local character. Yeah, there's a lot of good that comes from that. I'll just quickly rub out the excess blue there. Right, I think I'm pretty good. Do we have any extra comments? No, we don't. That means I can just go straight into the colouring, and indeed I will. I'm pretty happy with it. Oh, I went zoomed out completely. Pretty happy with where this is landing. I'm going to start off with the location colour. Pop that in, and let's get ourselves a decent brush, size 8, say, and take our broken temple here. It's Mercy House rather than the temple per se. It's a classic Warhammer building with a classical twist to it. Yep, love it. We have got ourselves our long crayfish farm sitting up here. where I've really got a feeling we should make some sort of reference to the craze. For those of you who know the craze, we could probably get something in about that, something really quite dark and grim about how they deal with their business. Yeah, quite like that. yeah, quite like that. Okay, we've on our locations, we also need one for our poisoner and where the poisoner is working from. So we could have the poisoner. I don't want too close. If I make this house here a bit more of a house, I'll do that. So let me just pop the poisoner up there. And that will be all the special locations for this area. We also have that tower that's sitting in the south end. And again, if you've got an idea for how that tower could manifest as a special location rather than just yet another tower. Why is this tower special? Why is it being marked out? What do we do with that one? Before I go check the comments, I'm also going to drop in on the extra buildings. So we've got all those colors in. And then I'll jump into the comments and see where we are. So let's quickly brown in all of our core buildings and how they connect with our walkway there. Doing this starts to pull everything together as an actual visible location. You can start to see where the shadows will fall, which we'll be doing in just a moment. Like it. Some of that. I'm thinking I'm quite liking leaving that as a back garden. I'm definitely not going to change it. I was originally going to have that flooded, but I think it's actually better not flooded, because that means we can have ourselves some form of character with a relatively above land area in this flooded section. Some ruined half-built buildings here, which probably house some really desperate folk. One building that's still largely intact, but probably lost its lower levels entirely. Another one that's mostly ruined. And that, I mean, that's largely, I mean, I could edge the cages so you get the sensation that these are locations per se. It just adds just that little bit of extra depth to them. Yeah, okay, that works. I'm going to add a little bit of ruin around the outside of that as well. Okay, we're done with the color. I'm going to check the comments. Yellow Bask, is there any particular reason why the tower here is marked purple? Yeah, it's a location that I accidentally colored in purple, and I thought, let's leave that and sort ourselves a feature tower, because I first discussed having a feature tower back when we were doing this part, and we worked our way all the way around and didn't do any of them as a feature one. So I've left one as a feature tower. So we've got ourselves one location that we need to decide exactly why this one is being marked. It's right beside where it's all beginning to collapse. So perhaps this is a center for where much of the rework for this particular part of town is being done. Perhaps it's a route through the walls, and this area is a definite weak point that people from outside the town can get inside the town for one reason or another. Perhaps it's something completely different. I'm quite happy with anything. I have no real strong argument for it. Esty then adds, he initially marked it by mistake. I did. Hey, why not have a purple tower? That's pretty much exactly what happened. Thanks, Esty. Alan says, could be run by a pair of twins. I've forgotten what we want the twins for. Is that for the training location? Oh no, it's not. It's for them, the Cray brothers. Yeah, it could be. A pair of twins actually suggests there's 4 of them. I don't know why that's making me laugh. It must be getting late. It's almost 10 o'clock. SD then adds, what if the champion pit fighter is allowed to live in the tower in relative luxury? Pretty good so far. The current occupant is very nervous about losing his cushy-ish home and wants someone to weaken his opposition. Now, I like that in general, but the problem is that it's actually attached to the main thoroughfare of the wall system. And we're going to have a wall that goes across here as well. It's going to have an iron portcullis that can be dropped down to completely block off the passageway of the canal. So we've got something that we're going to have soldiers that make their way there, and we're going to have soldiers that can make their way all the way to that, unless we collapse this section of wall here, which we could easily do. If anyone thinks collapsing that wall is a good idea, tell me. And Alan adds, multiple pairs of twins. Haha. In fact, I'm actually tempted to do that. You can have the Cray twins. and it's a pair of twins, and people refer to them as a pair of twins all the time. Then you meet them, and it's actually two sets of twins. I don't know why that tickles me, but it really does. I'm such a child. I'm thinking. I think actually I do want to separate that tower. So I'm going to do that as a quick amendment to what we've drawn, given those comments. Once I've done that amendment, I will run back into the comments again. So we'll have that collapse down into rubble in between, meaning that the guards can't quite reach the other tower. And that works really well because it has meant that this tower here is currently under the control of someone else. Let's say it's the gladiator, perhaps he lives there, or someone else, but somebody now lives in that tower who is most certainly not part of the state army or the military. Yeah, I quite like that. Okay, that's that quickly separated. And then Esty has a quick ad of, now I picture a gang who's all twins. I think that might be a touch too far, but I'm quite happy with having two sets of twins running the craze section there. That's crazy. Oh, God. Right, let's get the highlights and shades on this. If you've got any other ideas for how to deal with our Cray twins, do drop them in. If you've got any ideas for who could be living inside that interesting, this is going to be shadowed to about there, interesting tower, then again, do drop it in as a comment. And we will have a look at that before we call this all closed. Drops down deeply on that side, drops on that side. Okay. Nah, that's just a flood waiting to happen. Love it. Yeah, that's a mess. I think that possibly we should have an adventure hook involving that specifically. Someone who wants to get revenge for something that was done to someone in the flooded part of town, and wants this section of wall completely blown up to flood what would be about that much of the area even further, as they lose about another 2 feet worth of height. In fact, I'd run all the way through that area. So flood that area with canal water, which is currently being held off by the old original canal bit, and the other side just sunk. I think there's definitely something in that we could possibly play with. If anyone wants to bring up any ideas for how that could manifest, feel free to do so. Okay, this is going to be a big one, even though it's sunk. So let's quickly pop that across like so. That's not going to have any light over it, so that can go up. Right. So I'll finish off all the highlights. Pardon me, all the shades. And then I'll check the comments again, then do the highlights. And if all goes well, that will be us largely done. And I say congrats to us. We have finished an entire section of the town. And that's me just about done these shades. There's not much else to say here. Double check if there's anything else I want to put in. Don't think so. That sort of does. Maybe a bit more here. Yep. I think I'm done. I'll put a little bit of shadow on the inside of that. Yep, now I'm done. Let's just double check the comments. There's only a couple. It's easy. Waiting to happen as if the entire is not completely flooded. Yeah, quite well. You make it even more flooded. Yeah, also adds. Also, does that establish that the ground here is lower than the water level of the canal? Yes, I think it is. I don't think it's necessarily that much lower. It could be a relatively shallow one, but it's definitely lower. Maybe it's different at different seasons. So perhaps it's as low as this area when we're in drier seasons. But it during times of rain, it increases in the canal. And whilst it also increases in the sinkholes that we have here, it doesn't increase the same amount, meaning that in the summer months, and particularly spring months, there's quite a likely chance that if we reach the river's going into spate, and it's really flooding down from the heights, and our lock systems are having difficulties dealing with it, then yeah, we could have a potential of a proper flood going into that area. Perhaps this is something that actually happens relatively commonly, as in twice, maybe 3 times a year. The entirety of the flooded area just floods up with water that seeps over from the canals when there's too much water coming down. This is not a particularly cleverly designed canal, so it's going to have problems with flooding. We're talking relatively quickly built canal system by people who were probably the cheapest option on hand. Scooter ads, Reinhold and Regnar Karpdorf versus Heinrich and Bernhold Karpedheim. Are we looking at our two sets of twins there? I almost have half an urge to try and make them one set of the twins really look nothing like twins. A little bit like Ron and Ron, the two Rons in for really dating me. No, in fact, I think I used that already in Warhammer. Regardless, I quite like the idea of two of the twins not really looking very like each other at all. And perhaps rather than making them all men, we can have two women and two men, and they're not married. So the two twins aren't married to the two twins, or possibly they are married, two sets of twins married to each other. Lots of potentials there. Anyway, let's go sort out these highlights. There's lots of different ideas that you could potentially run with there. If you've got any that you like, do drop them into the comments. I'm going to quickly finish off this section with its highlights, and then we can look at this and say, by golly, I think we might be done this section of the map. As before, all the highlighting techniques that I'm using here, techniques, funny word, were detailed in one of the tutorials that's over on the Rookery. If you want to know how to map like this, you can do so. I don't mean the talking for hours part. I think anybody could probably do that. I mean the actual nature of how the map looks. Okay, right. Oh, this is really easy. I'm almost done already. Yeah, I'm almost done already. Sweet. Love it. Right, I'm going to do the watery bits now. I have myself a little bit of white to run along with all of our black lines, just to give that idea of the ripples, how the water is moving, being used. We won't be quite done yet, though, because I want to also add some vegetation into this area, because I imagine quite a few parts of it are relatively overgrown, particularly at the edges, and roots will be holding some parts of it in place. So I think that's relatively important to also reflect in this. So before I check the comments, I will quickly do a little bit of vegetation. So go into our trees layer and get myself my little brush for doing trees that I use for this. It's an old brush from Photoshop a bajillion editions ago that I've ported over to this version of Photoshop just so I have it. So I used it as a kid when I used to do little maps on my very first Photoshop attempts, and I've kind of never really left it behind. Yeah, I can imagine there's a fair bit of vegetation in parts of this. Again, mostly on the periphery, sitting at the back where things have turned a bit wild. Yeah, that works. Do I want any down here? Maybe a little bit of vegetation on the side of some of the buildings. Give the idea that it's got a bit overgrown and is no longer being tended as it once was. There would have originally been gardens and all sorts in some of these places. So I don't want to fill that up because we're using that for storage for our fish, well, our oysters or whatever we decide the type of fish that's there. Okay, is that enough? Maybe a bit here just to kind of balance all these little lines. Yeah, okay, I think I'm happy with that. All right, with that, I'm going to check the last comments. Yeah, lads, I was thinking two sets of related twins, the older pair and the younger pair. That could also work. And possibly, again, that could be two women and two men. That could also work. Maybe one half of each of those twins is our Romeo and Juliet, tying them all together. Oh, possibly. Yeah. That might work. Two sets of fraternal twins rather than identical. Yeah, that might also work, particularly if two of the... particularly if, say for example, we've got ourselves a man and a woman in each one of the twin sets, and say the two women look identical, but they're not twins. That could be a really interesting, confusing, messed up little twin set of families. Yeah, I quite like that. So I'm going to pull out and take a look at what we have and say, we've done a pretty good job today. That has very nicely filled in that area. I think it's got a lot of character. I think we've really nailed this one. Alan's still dropping names, Antonius and Mariki. Yeah, sure. Drop them all into the Discord so we don't lose all the ideas, because I really like all of this. I'm going to pull out and just look at that for a moment and say, well done, us. I think we've done pretty well today. we've got ourselves a lot of flavor into a relatively tight area. We've built ourselves a bit of a community. We've got ourselves a mixture of halflings, ogres, and humans, mostly humans, who are living in a very bad part of town. Some parts of this you can wade through. Other parts you're going to need to have some form of conveyance to get through it. The waters are deep enough that we've got ourselves some creatures down in the worst parts of it. Perhaps in the real depths of it is where we've got a fen worm living. Perhaps there's a small bog octopus or two living down there as well. These are relatively commonly encountered creatures in the Warhammer world, so there's no reason for us not to use them. Equally, there could be some nastier, smaller creatures, just normal poisonous snakes and similar down there. And on top of all that, we've got our walkways, our buildings being built on top of older buildings, our old Mercy House of Shalia. I think this place kind of rocks. I really quite like it. The only thing that I'm left asking at the end, as we're just looking at this, is what do we name our slums, our sunken part of town in general? Is there anything that we want? I've got the wrong brush. Let me just change that. Just realized I missed some highlights, so I'm just filling them in as I talk. We're going to have to start naming districts. I think that's an important part of making sure that this place feels like it's a real place. So if you've got any ideas for the names of these districts, do drop them down into our Discord. We can start figuring out the write-ups for these places. I really like this one. One last comment before we go from Esty, which is Romeo and Juliet, where Juliet looks identical to Romeo's sister. Messed up indeed. Oh my goodness. This is getting awkward. And on that bombshell, let's call it an evening. I'd like to say thank you to everybody who turned up. For those of you who came at the beginning and are watching this later, I'm happy to see you made it to the end again. For those of you who are coming to the stream much later and have never come in live, thanks so much for watching us. It's really appreciated. As always, please do put a big thumbs up, like on our video. That would be super, super appreciated. But beyond that, I'm going to sign off for the evening. I'm going to put up a post concerning next week's stream, probably on Saturday or Sunday, because I'm not sure if I can make next Thursday. If I can, the post will go up giving the date. If I can't, the post will come up for the date after that, which will be 2 weeks from today. And I'll also put a post up on the Patreon side for the Lawhammer Patreon for where we're going to be mapping next. So if anyone wants to dig in and give some different options for the next place to go, that'll be the place to go. I'll probably put up 3 different areas for which part to map next, and you can give yourself an idea. I've just noticed it says Dawi ship down here. Did we have ourselves a dwarf ship? I'd forgotten about that one. I'm imagining Iron Rook at some point saying, yes, dwarves! So with that, I will bid you all adieu and say thanks so much. Without you, this stream wouldn't work. And it has been a joy, as always, to engage with you all and come up with a map that is quite unlike anything I would have created if I did it by myself. So until next time, I shall bid you all adieu. Thanks very much. Until I will see you all in a week or 2 weeks. Bye-bye.